Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. I'm Tom Keene, along with Paul Sweeney. Join us each day for insight from the best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. You can also watch the show live on YouTube. Visit the Bloomberg Podcast channel on YouTube to see the show weekday mornings from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern from our global headquarters in New York City. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen, and always on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Terminal, and the Bloomberg Business app. Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene in New York, a special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance. We welcome all of you across America, around the world, to 3 hours of conversation on what has become an American habit, a shooting of a candidate for president, a shooting of a former president. President Trump was wounded. We all know that now, but we will look forward here in the next 3 hours with good conversation. In a moment, we'll go to our reporter in Pennsylvania who was in Butler. This morning, I am joined by the gentleman I wanted to be with, David Gura. Joins us now, of course, the big take. But much more than that is political coverage over the years with the NBC network, with NPR, and now back at Bloomberg. David, a difficult time for you and I to get together.
Absolutely. This was a shocking moment yesterday, to say the least. This was to be the last rally that the former president gave before making his way to Milwaukee, where the Republican National Convention is scheduled to start on Monday. And there's a lot to take care of between now and then. He was floating the naming of his vice presidential nominee on an indefinite day. Could have been today, could have been tomorrow. That still has to happen. So what was going to be a delicate and fraught circumstance in Milwaukee has only become more so after what happened in Butler.
And Milwaukee is front and center. That's really what we're going to focus on today, is the path to Milwaukee, to Chicago, and the adjusted path to November we're going to do this morning with pure conversation and the news flow. Overnight is the former president is resting well, if Donald Trump can ever rest. Somehow I think he'll be up and about this morning, to say the least.
Yes, his campaign saying that we are going to see him as this convention unfolds. He's not going to be off the campaign trail. And just to get everyone up to speed on sort of where things stand, this took place yesterday around 6:15 in the evening. Then we heard from the current president, from Joe Biden, in both a print statement and comments that he delivered in Rehoboth Beach, where he was for the weekend. After he delivered those remarks, he made his way back to Washington. He has been briefed throughout. This morning, he's scheduled to receive another briefing from both law enforcement and Homeland Security at the White House. So there is still a vacuum in which we don't have a whole lot of information. This investigation is underway, but I look at this as happening in two parallel tracks. That, the investigation, what happened and how this could have happened in Butler, Pennsylvania. The second being, what are the ramifications of this? Yes, for this campaign, but for the country more broadly, Tom.
I was sitting, and we're going to have a good 3-hour conversation, folks, to inform you about the immediacy of Milwaukee tomorrow. I'll be honest, I was not all that much up to speed on it, as David Gura is, and it's here. Milwaukee is tomorrow, regularly scheduled, but frankly, forever changed. And before we go to Hadriana Lowenkron, our reporter now in Pittsburgh, David, I was sitting there when the news came across. John Farrow informed me of the news, actually. And the first thing I thought of was George Wallace in 1972. I don't know why I thought specifically of George Wallace, but I think to begin the conversation, when you combine terrible assassination with assassination attempt, it's far too many across America, back to 1881, and frankly, back before that to Lincoln and beyond.
George Wallace, the governor, shot while campaigning outside of Washington, D.C. back in 1972. But You're right. I think that something that adds to what's so startling about this moment is we haven't had attempts like these on candidates for president or sitting presidents in some time. Of course, this has been a very fraught time politically. There has been political violence, I think most recently of the attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband. What happened?
Which Speaker Pelosi spoke about yesterday with some emotion.
Referenced in her comments yesterday as well. So there have been moments like that. Steve Scalise, the Republican congressman, attacked while preparing for a congressional baseball game in 2017. And of course, Gabby Giffords, the congresswoman from Arizona. So we have had this. It has been boiling, but we haven't had these attacks on presidential candidates and presidents in some time, in some decades, as you say, Tom.
Let us begin our coverage. We're out on YouTube this morning, and of course on Bloomberg Radio across the nation and worldwide. On YouTube, we are at Bloomberg Podcasts, which is our growing digital presence. We say good morning worldwide on Apple CarPlay and on Android Auto as well. We get lucky in that who was in Butler, Pennsylvania, pulling the short straw, covering a campaign event on a weekend, a hot, steamy weekend in the summer, was a former intern of Bloomberg Surveillance. I mean, you get lucky when
I didn't know this, but that
you
that
get
is
lucky
luck.
when that happens. Joining us, newly minted from the University of Pennsylvania and doing yeoman's duty for our White House correspondence team, Hadriana Lowenkron joins us. Hadriana, both David and I don't want to go back and run the film and the incredible still pictures from yesterday, but the simple shock of the perimeter in Butler, Pennsylvania, with your experience being on the road with a former president, obviously that perimeter was too narrow, but was it a normal perimeter of protection yesterday for President Trump?
Yes, thanks for having me on. I've covered many a rally in this past election cycle. Some have been indoors, some have been outdoors. There's the same layer of the Secret Service. There's the security, conveyor belt, and you walk through, and there are officers left and right, and everything felt as per usual. People were milling around, they were eating, they were dancing to the music. Everything felt normal until, it wasn't.
Hey, Hadriana, how much of what the president was talking about in that field in Butler was stock and trade? What he said in these rallies before, something that Tom mentioned a moment ago, as we are now on the precipice of this political convention. Over the course of the weekend, my inbox was filled with announcements from the Trump campaign of who's going to be speaking at that event in Milwaukee, really pushing ahead to the programming that's going to take place there. Was this a routine rally in that sense? How forward-looking was the former president when he was speaking there?
This did definitely appear to be, normal, all things considered. It's quite an event. But for us, actually, us as reporters and, a lot of political junkies paying attention to this, where a lot of the intrigue came was actually in the lead up to the event. As we had mentioned earlier, we're still waiting for a VP pick. Some thought that it was going to be announced earlier this week at a rally in Miami. Florida Senator Marco Rubio was there. He was addressed several times, and then there was no announcement. Here in the lead up, we're trying to figure out which people will be there. Ohio's J.D. Vance from Ohio nearby. So everyone was trying to figure that out at first. This only happened a few minutes in. We're still looking around. Will there be any surprise guests? And when we all kind of think, okay, well, that hasn't happened yet, let's focus on the content of the speech, which also seems to be at that moment fairly similar, then this happens. And it was just shocking, really.
Hey, Hadriana, I know that the Biden campaign has changed its tack as a result of this. They've been pulling ads off the airwaves around the country, scaling back the outreach that they're doing in the coming days. I'm very curious both how this shapes or reshapes the Trump campaign's path forward going into Milwaukee, and how you think it might reshape that event itself. Safe to say this is something that's going to come up multiple times over the course of this week, but any insight that you have into sort of how this is reshaping or reframing the Trump campaign?
Right. So as we know, they have put out a statement. We're kind of going to push forward as scheduled. Trump, it's important to note, Trump was supposed to have his sentencing in the New York trial that I was actually in New York for, covering in person. So my head was at first on that and looking at how so much has changed for him. Obviously the sentencing, the indictments, all of that has helped him rally his base, bring in, money. And, something like this could equally, if not enhance, charging, and really rallying his base there. So we could see a lot of conversation about that in terms of what he speaks about Thursday night. There's also, of course, more, intrigue now, and it underscores the importance of whoever his VP pick will be. Same as we know with the Democratic Party, where people are, calling on Biden to step aside. So I think that really will be a lot of the conversation.
Hadriana, one of the advantages here, and David is so ancient, he actually remembers this, where a convention was a 4-day television extravaganza from, if they were polite, 10 in the morning, but even 8 in the morning till 2 a.m., depending on when the cigars lit out. You don't know that is the Ute of America. What Milwaukee will we see? It's a modern convention, sterilized, but will it be covered differently now with this assassination attempt?
That's a great question, and we've already on our end been receiving, briefings as to what can and cannot, be posted on social media with credentials and what to do should protests occur, which, as we all know, already was likely before this happening. So definitely we all have to, stand our guard and be very communicative. And, as for the hours, Trump is, as you had mentioned at the top of the show, he has a lot of energy. There's a lot of programming planned. We have the speaker list out already. And so I'm assuming they're going to want to kind of go ahead and put forward business as usual.
Yeah. And David, jump in here. And through the 3 hours, folks, we're going to make this a very, I hope, informed but informal conversation. David, I'm sorry. Yesterday at 6:30 p.m., convention protocol changed. There's no end of buts about it.
I was participating in the coverage that we were doing immediately after this on Bloomberg Radio. Jody Schneider, who heads up a lot of our political coverage on TV and radio, is already in Milwaukee, and she was saying how, going into this event, there was, as you'd expect, very strict security surrounding the center of Milwaukee.
Yeah, and CBS reports this morning they're extending the perimeter. Perimeter's
going to get wider. Security is going to get more stringent as well. I just go back to what I said a moment ago, which is there was already such an inherent fragility both to this convention and the Democratic National Convention. This is only going to make that even more fragile, Tom.
Okay. Hadriana, do you travel directly to Milwaukee from Pittsburgh? Is that your itinerary?
Yes, I'm headed out to the airport shortly.
Okay, safe travels. Hadriana Lowenkron there yesterday, her direct coverage of this assassination attempt, and of course, as Sunday beckons here across the nation, it is arresting former president. Of course, we haven't mentioned yet President Biden with his comments yesterday, and you have to believe, David, that President Biden will have to finesse the message further here this morning.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned at the top, he gave this written statement immediately after this. He was attending Mass in Rehoboth Beach. Shortly after that, had his first briefing from law enforcement, delivered this print statement, and then traveled to the emergency response building in Rehoboth where he gave those comments. And I'll read briefly from what he had to say. Everybody must condemn it, everybody. And effectively said there's no place for this in America. And I will say, as I've sort of charted the responses that we've gotten from members of Congress, members of the House and Senate here in the United States, and world leaders as well. That is the overarching message that is ringing out here, Tom, that this is something that is antithetical to American democracy and has to be called out. And indeed, most politicians have been doing that.
We welcome all of you across the nation and worldwide. A special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance. David Gura and Tom Keene in our studios in New York. Hadriana Lowenkron in Butler yesterday, joining us moments ago. Jordan Fabian will join us from the White House here across these 3 hours this morning. A program note, and this is a credible commitment of Bloomberg Radio. I think I can say this in all the years. It will be a Sunday set of talk shows as we've never heard on Bloomberg Radio. At 11 a.m. this morning, NBC's Meet the Press. At 12 noon, Fox News Sunday. At 1300, 1 p.m. this week on ABC. And at 2 p.m., Margaret Brennan, Robert Costa, and all of CBS and Face the Nation. So you will see from 8 to 11 this morning with David Gura. And then from 11 until 3 p.m., we will give you the talk shows as all of America confronts this assassination attempt. We've got many more good voices coming up, but certainly someone who's been an immense support and remarkably prescient about the dynamics of Donald Trump's Republican Party. Terry Haines is kind enough to join us in this 8 o'clock hour with Pangea Policy. Terry, your great theme has been a loyal Trump following and the GOP from a distance deciding what to do with Mr. Trump a second time around. How did that change yesterday?
I don't think it changed very much, Tom, and good morning to you and David. Thank you for having me. I don't think it changed very much. You've got a situation here where the race has been remarkably stable, as everybody knows. But, look at what happened in the last month where you have, all this caterwauling about Biden from Democrats and everything else, and yet the national two-way beauty contest poll of polls barely moves from Trump +1 to Trump +3. These are registered voter polls in which the margin of error is at least 3. There's an erroneous assumption here, which is that somehow Biden voters are going to move to Trump. Biden voters would move to pretty much any other Republican with some frequency, but they've shown a lot that they're not going to move to Trump. I frankly don't expect that to change, so I think the race will end up being a lot more stable than most folks think, and certainly more than prediction markets think.
Terry, let me put a question to you that I put to Hadriana a moment ago, just in a different way, and that is, how do you see the Trump campaign reflecting on what's happening here? Of course, people are still processing the events that took place yesterday in Butler, but do you see it as changing in any fundamental way or reshaping the message from the Trump campaign?
Well, I don't see the message and the policies changing, David. What I do, my instinct is this, is that you will see a continuation of the more presidential Trump that you saw in the first debate in terms of how that's presented, how he presents himself. I think the convention goers and most people around them will be much more keyed up, and there'll be a little more frenzy around this than there otherwise would have been, and the temperature already was going to be pretty high. Trump doesn't get anything out of stoking that. He gets a great deal more out of it than by continuing that more presidential look. I mean, they were already going into this thinking, Biden and the Democrats are thrashing. We profit by being more presidential looking and more in control and all the rest. I think Trump doubles down on that. Certainly, I think he'd be smart to.
Looking at our Top Live blog on the Bloomberg and on Bloomberg.com, an incredible comprehensive look at what's been happening here with contributions from our colleagues all over the world. The latest here, a post on Truth Social from Donald Trump indicating he does plan to speak at the convention in Milwaukee. Perhaps no surprise, but the comment from the former president is, "I truly love our country and love you all and look forward to speaking to our great nation this week from Wisconsin." Terry, picking up on what you said just a moment ago about, I won't say this new presidential Donald Trump, but somebody who is approaching this with a discipline and seriousness that might strike some as novel and is certainly outlined in this incredible piece by Tim Alberta in The Atlantic, describing the campaign apparatus that is built up around him that is, I think it's safe to say, much more professional and disciplined than it was in 2020 and 2016. What does he have to say, in your estimation, in that speech at the RNC?
Well, fundamentally, he has to show that he's ready to lead and that he's responsible. The less rabble-rousing, the better. I mean, I think as you've just pointed out very well, the rabble-rousing, incendiary reputation precedes him and, to some extent, exceeds him. I think he's got to show himself a little bit more presidential and kind of able to lead. More serious. Don't hide your light under a bushel, but be a little bit more serious about what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and precisely how you're going to drive things forward. There is a lot of stuff that swirls around Trump that get used by the opposition to his detriment. I think he needs to spend some time dispelling that.
We're lucky to have Jordan Fabian with us now. He's a White House correspondent for Bloomberg News. As we look ahead to that next briefing at 10:30 this morning, Jordan, get us up to speed. We've heard from the president now twice, once in print, another time in person. Do we expect to hear from him again today, on this Sunday?
At the moment, there's nothing expected, but I wouldn't be surprised at a moment like this if the president came out to speak after he has that briefing you just mentioned, and we gather more information about what happened, the suspect, and just the overall fraught political moment we're in this country. You have leaders across the spectrum calling for civility, calling to turn down the temperature. Wouldn't be surprised if the president had something to say about that either today or in the coming days.
There was an admission at the end of that statement that the president delivered in Rehoboth Beach. He was asked, was this an assassination attempt? And he said he had an opinion, but he didn't have the facts. Walk us through how he is getting these facts. He has been surrounded by some of his closest advisors. Steve Ricchetti has been there, his Homeland Security advisor, Secretary of Homeland Security, head of the Secret Service Agency. Who is giving him information, and just describe how wide the vacuum is at this point in time as we look at this investigation that's just in its first few hours here.
Yeah, that's right. He's been briefed by his team of advisors, and as you mentioned, one of them is Liz Sherwood-Daniels, his Homeland Security advisor. There's also Alejandro Mayorkas, who runs the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees Secret Service, and there's several others. And what they're doing is they're gathering information from the frontline law enforcement agencies who are working on this, so Secret Service, FBI, and the Justice Department, and filtering that up to the president. And as we heard last night, the FBI, at the time that they delivered that press conference at 11:45 p.m., they said they had identified a suspect. They didn't name them, and they also didn't know about a motive. So, the president only knows as much as the law enforcement agency. Mm-hmm. So that's why you heard the president exercise caution.
You guys are the pros here, David Gura and Jordan Fabian here. I get that there's going to be a 7-year investigation and this and that, and I was actually, folks, I don't have the number yet of the distance from the shooter to Mr. Trump, but I was going to stand at the corner of Fifth Avenue in Central Park and see how far past the Apple Store and past Bergdorf Goodman was that distance. And David, the answer is clearly that perimeter failed. What's the perimeter look like, Jordan Fabian, in Milwaukee and in Chicago for the president? Is the perimeter in Chicago up to Wisconsin?
No, it's a great question, Tom, and there's clear questions about how the Secret Service, who prepares these sites, apparently missed this.
Okay, but I get it that they missed it, and there's going to be a 6-year Warren Commission on that. There deserves to be. What happens in Milwaukee and Chicago? David, they have to be in a full-scale panic.
I don't know if it's a panic so much as just a complete reworking and reevaluation of what's happened here. And to your comment, Tom, about the proximity of where this shooter was, we're talking hundreds of yards. And from all that we've seen of footage shot by those in the audience at this rally, sort of interviews with standers-by and those who were at the event afterward, this was incredibly close. I think, Jordan, you can give us some insight into this. I know that in the immediate aftermath of this, there were lawmakers who suggested that there should be a greater Secret Service detail tagged to the president-elect. Can you just describe sort of the disparity, so much as there is one, between the two of them? Safe to say the former president here is traveling with an awful lot of law enforcement.
Yeah, so former presidents usually have smaller Social Security.
You and I both. I tripped you up. I apologize.
Yeah, all good. The Secret Service detail. The former president, though, he had a bigger one, given that unlike other former presidents, he was traveling around the country doing political events, and now, of course, is a nominee. So he did receive some more Secret Service coverage recently, right, although there are lawmakers who are unsatisfied with that. But to Tom's question, there was some complaints from Republican organizers in Milwaukee about this promenade that apparently exists near the main street near the convention site. The Secret Service and the organizers said they had worked something out, but you have to imagine they're going to be re-examining every single planning detail in the coming weeks here, especially for Democrats, and then the days for Republicans.
Jordan Fabian, thank you so much for starting early on a Sunday with us. No doubt an exhausting day, a full day at the White House. Jordan Fabian, our White House correspondent. And again, we say thank you to Hadriana Lowenkron in Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, south of Butler, for her coverage here early this morning.
And just want to flag, Tom, she's written a wonderful and very evocative piece about being at that rally. As you said, we're not dwelling on what happened there and what we see in the video and the sound of that shooting, but she has written a first-person piece about being in the audience for that and what happened in the aftermath. You can find that at Bloomberg.com and on the terminal.
We are fortunate to continue with Terry Haines of Pangea Policy. He has given us perspective over many months in court. Even the best thing about Terry, David, is he sends donuts every once in a while. It's the only reason we have him back on. Terry, we need to get of an assassination attempt back to some form of cadence, humor, the human comedy of America. How are we going to get back there, Terry? We did it after JFK. I would like to think they did it after James Garfield in 1881. But in this modern media frenzy, I don't get it. How do we get back to normal?
Well, I'm not sure things are. It'll take a long time. It took the echoes of President Kennedy's assassination haunted lots and lots of people for years, and even in the 70s, there was a congressional investigation into the bullet theories and all the rest. I mean, it never truly went away for a decade plus, and the reverberations are going to continue. And frankly, I think made worse, or made more constant by the 24/7 news cycle and the videos that we now get constantly. But how it's done, frankly, I think is a hard lift, which is started by politicians of all stripes demonstrating a little more humility and a little more sense of purpose.
Terry, I want to ask you about official Washington's response to this, and I think that probably you, like I have, been looking at tweets and posts and reactions to all of this, and one stood out to me in particular, and that's from the junior senator from Ohio, from J.D. Vance, who not long after this tweeted out, "Today is not some isolated incident. The central premise of the Biden campaign is that Donald Trump is an authoritarian fascist. That rhetoric led directly to the assassination attempt of Donald Trump." An outlier comment, but there are others in that outlier camp, again, with the junior senator. And I note that we heard from House Speaker Mike Johnson that the House will conduct a full investigation of the tragic events today. You bring up what happened with John F. Kennedy. There was a period of time after that when the business of the country was figuring out what happened here and how it was going to carry on. Here you have some politicians already pushing ahead to what I can only assume will be rather circus-like hearings investigating this. I mean, that hearing, the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability hearing, scheduled on July the 22nd. What do you make of that? And as we talk, as Tom brings up sort of how we process this and move ahead from it, how do you do it when you have these kind of countervailing factors at play?
Well, it makes it tougher. There's such a reflex built into so many politicians of all stripes, I should say. I mean, I find Senator Vance's comments over the top, but then again, some of the things he says are demonstrable. I mean, they're true, but the same of the other side. And I'm not engaging a whataboutism here to point out that both sides are way over their skis, which is why I get to humility. I was asked on your air the day after January 6th what I thought should happen, and I said what I just said this morning. Politicians need to demonstrate more humility there, and there's plenty of them out there that reflexively aren't doing it today. These people need to be a lot more humble and, frankly, I think a lot more sober, and that will help us get past this moment.
Terry, in the time left, I want to talk about the president's constituency, the people, President Trump's constituency, the people that were there yesterday, and I think that we all understand President Biden has an encyclopedic knowledge of Eastern Pennsylvania. The path here, and you and I talked, I think 48 hours ago, it seems, about the 17th Congressional District, Connor Lamb's district, and how President Biden has lost those people. Those people were in that audience yesterday. Give us your political picture of Western Pennsylvania, from Bethel Park, south of Pittsburgh, up to Pittsburgh, where Hadriana Lowenkron came in moments ago, and then up north on the New York border to Butler. Who were in the audience yesterday?
There's everybody remembers the old James Carville comment about there being sort of 4 dots of blue in Pennsylvania surrounded by Alabama. Western Pennsylvania, what Western Pennsylvania is politically today is a donut. The donut is a little sea of blue, and that city is the city of Pittsburgh and a few immediate suburbs surrounded by an absolute sea of red. And these people are historic. I'm from there, which doesn't give me any more juice here, but I spent time there all my life. And what those people are historic. John Kennedy, Franklin Roosevelt, Scoop Jackson Democrats, who has spent the last two generations being terrifically disappointed.
I'm going to this story, and Terry, you're fired up, Terry. We're going to stay on this theme. David Gura, he just hit my childhood. From where you sit, David Gura, with all you've done in Washington, how did the Democrats lose Butler, PA? That's the heart of this election.
I'm going to opine here, and Terry, you should feel free to jump in and set me straight if I get this wrong. But I think that you had a large swath of this population that grew disillusioned with how they were being looked at and taken care of by those in power in Washington. I just think about the current crucible that we're in here as we look at the state of the steel industry in particular in Pennsylvania, what happened when a Japanese company made an overture to take over U.S. Steel, the response to that, and how this is, for all that Terry describes, a very contested area in this country. I mean, you have Joe Biden, also a son of Pennsylvania, vowed son of Pennsylvania, trying to appeal to voters in this area, trying to reclaim them, trying to say that he's one of them as well. That's my sense of it, Terry. Am I right there? When do you see that transition is happening? When you saw that movement away from being straight and unquestionable Democrats to turning purple, and then I think more welcoming of the Republican Party in Western PA?
Yeah, David, I think you're right about that. I think also you've got two things going on. One, that people are hugely disappointed, and I think feel marginalized by how very little was done to try to reach out to them. You know, the Democratic outreach tends to be in that area tends to be over the last 30 years or so tends to be banging on kind of the greatest hits of past industry combined with marginalized programs for marginalized people. Well, we'll work or retrain you. We'll do this. We'll do that. We'll do the other thing. That's number one. Number two, there's a real concern, being sort of old-style patriots as many of these folks are, that Democratic Party's losing them by, frankly, talking about other groups at the expense of kind of dealing with the bedrock problems of the country, and then you also get a sense that that Biden administration Democrats generally are attacking the economic engine that exists in that region now, which is energy, which is fracking and the like, and and they take very personally the idea that the new economic engine is something that's under attack by Democrats. I think a lot of that combines to flip them. You have only to look south to West Virginia to see how quickly that sort of went and goes.
Terry, I'd love to ask you lastly here just to comment on the historical resonance of this and maybe help us think through how this reshapes American politics broadly. When I was living in Washington, when I'd go up Connecticut Avenue, I'd look over at the Hilton there, think about what happened in 1981. It still seemed very resonant. It was a place on the map because of that, like other landmarks in Washington are. I'm curious if you feel the same way and how you see what happened yesterday in Pennsylvania reshaping American attitudes toward politics. We know that Donald Trump welcomes big crowds. I was thinking, and Amy Morris, our colleague, was leading our coverage yesterday and asked me a very good question about this, going back to January 6th when he was kind of welcoming of all, dismissive of the fact that there needed to be metal detectors for the rally that he had on the National Mall then, playing a little fast and loose with security there. But again, really welcoming large crowds, enthusiasm for politics, his brand of politics. How does this reshape that at all, and how do you process, how do you think that this will resonate going forward?
I'm with you on the history. I'm like the kid in The Sixth Sense, where I see dead people all the time. I live in Alexandria, Virginia, which used to brand itself the most historic town in the United States, home of George Washington, Robert Lee, others, and I see it everywhere. I have the same resonances that you do. What I get in Washington today, though, is a sense where the politics are kind of curdled into Team Red, Team Blue, reflexively branded stuff, pursued and pervaded mostly by people who are invested in that, and very little thinking outside the box and thinking of the national interest and thinking about how to move forward. And I think this probably, for the country at large, I think that probably only exacerbates that perception.
Terry, thank you for your generous time this Sunday morning. Terry Haines of Pangea, folks, writing exceptionally bright notes. You can see them out on LinkedIn. I really can't say enough about a follow on LinkedIn as being a value add from Terry Haines of Pangea. There's a blur here. David and I have decided we're really not going to go back and relive what we all were riveted by for 5 hours last night. We're going to look forward. And in Milwaukee is the person, there's people, folks, that piece together 20 and 40 people and keep it going. The queen of all-nighters for Bloomberg News is Tyler Kendall in Milwaukee right now, leading our convention technical structure. And there's a small sentence at 11 p.m. last night that I missed. This evening, President Biden spoke to former President Trump. David, that slipped through the late night that the two gentlemen spoke.
And it bears us thinking about, these are two politicians who have a great deal of enmity toward each other on the campaign trail, and there was something extraordinary about that. Extraordinary in the sense that it hasn't happened before. Joe hasn't called Donald, and they haven't spoken by phone before. So this is a remarkable moment that took place, and you could sort of see the gravity of it as Joe Biden spoke in Delaware, saying he tried to reach him. Donald Trump was with his doctors then, he was unable to. But several times during that very brief statement in Delaware, President Biden emphasized that he wanted to get him on the phone, hoped to get him on the phone. And as you say, Tom, we got that readout saying that the two of them had spoken. No more detail besides that, but it's significant enough that the two of them spoke.
David Gura and Tom Keene, a special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance from our world headquarters in New York. Good conversation to come as we move forward. Professor Schiller of Brown University on the scope and the reach of our history of assassination and assassination attempt. We do that next. We're on Bloomberg Radio worldwide and across the nation on a Sunday morning.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene with my special guest, David Gura. Of course, the big take out on Bloomberg podcast, but so much more. David Gura here today on this horrific Sunday morning after an assassination attempt with his wonderful political coverage, all he's done for NBC and NPR, and we're thrilled to have him back with Bloomberg as well. David, you're always way more prepared than I am. What is your insight of what needs to be done by the Trump administration in the next 24 hours?
I'll pick up on what Terry said, and I was struck by the resonance of his comments, and he brought up the fact that sort of what he said today is right in line with what he said after January 6th. And so he's calling for the rhetoric to be calmer and politicians to take a step back, wait a while to comment beyond just expressing their thanks to law enforcement and good wishes to the former president. But I think we have seen in recent weeks, as we were discussing with Terry, a very disciplined Trump campaign. He hasn't been out there fulminating on the campaign trail. He's been content to let Democrats battle it out over their prospects and what's going to happen in Chicago. I expect that we will have this reframed for us in that marquee speech in Milwaukee.
And this is
by
Thursday.
The former president. That's right, Thursday night.
But they got to get they got to get Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and they've got the usual victims lined up to speech. Is anyone listening to those speeches anymore? I mean, Wendy Schiller remembers, David Gura, when we hung on every single word within the pageantry. From where you sit, David, the pageantry's gone, right?
Happened yesterday. There was a strong effort by the former president to make this must-see TV, for lack of a better term. He hasn't named his vice presidential pick, and I think that is the thing that most of America would have and will seize on now, is who that individual is going to be and what he or she has to say on the stage in Milwaukee.
On this Sunday morning across America on Bloomberg Radio, on many of our other services as well, David Gura and Tom Keene, a special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance, which means we need a special guest. She is at Brown University. Wendy Schiller joins us, a definitive book on American civics, a sense of history that folds into the present day and our future. Professor Schiller, good morning. When I first heard this news, John Farrow actually called me to tell me of the news, And I thought of George Wallace in 1972. We can take our violence of assassination and assassination attempt back to Garfield, to Lincoln, and frankly beyond. Professor Schiller, why is America so violent in its politics?
Well, I thought about that too. I thought about, of course, Ronald Reagan as well, and I was very grateful to see former President Trump emerge, relatively okay, but he was, in fact, shot in the ear. And then the sadness of having attendees killed and injured is, really just brings us back exactly to these traumatic moments in American political life where we say, how could that happen? And yet it happens very frequently in America, even relative to any other country, at least in the 20th century and certainly the 21st century. And we have a culture, you can argue it's a gun culture and that guns are too easy to get. There's a sort of AR-15 argument that's going around. However, as we all know, those prior acts of violence were not committed with AR-15s, so they've still happened anyway. And we have to ask ourselves that we have this weird juxtaposition between peaceful transitions of power, which we have had with January 6th with some exception, but that still happened relatively peacefully after that, and the rest of the world, which has not had that history of peaceful transition of power. So it's this really stark difference between our culture and the violence we see, everyday gun violence, but also political violence, and then our system, which compared to the rest of the world, remains very peaceful and orderly.
Dr. Schiller, I was in a diner in Brooklyn last night when this happened and looked up at the screen and saw those 15 seconds being replayed over and over again. And I've got 3 kids, 11 and younger, watching it with me and fielded a lot of difficult questions as a result of that. What happened? How did this happen? What does it mean? Is this politics? You teach the American presidency, other classes to Brown undergrads, older than my kids, but I imagine they have similar questions. They haven't lived through this. They don't have a memory of 1981. What do you say to younger people in this country about the state of politics today? What something like what happened yesterday means for the shape of American politics today?
Well, I mean, obviously, you know this too, our political rhetoric has, in fact, declined. We have had periods of time when in the press, people said horrible things about politicians, going back to John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. It's not that that is new. It's that it's not just politicians. It's people, everyday voters, people sort of not having family conversations, not associating with people because of their political affiliation. We call that negative partisanship. It's hatred that's now been really cultivated of the other side, and we dehumanize the other side when we hate. And that element has intensified in the last 10 to 15 years. Sadly, your kids, very sadly, and on the kids that I'm teaching, have lived through school gun violence in a way that we did not when I was a kid. So their world is populated with gun violence. They're more used to that than we are. So we look at it as political violence as a threat, but that generation says, will I be safe going to school? So I think these two things have come together in this moment in time.
Is there optimism in Providence that this can change? I think to what was actually kind of a quaint moment just a couple of days ago when you had this transition of power, peaceful transition of power in London. You heard from Rishi Sunak acknowledging political differences with the guy who defeated him, with Keir Starmer, and a very generous speech from Keir Starmer when he was named prime minister as well. And there was something, again, both quaint but also refreshing about that. Can you envision in America when we get back to that, when things aren't as fraught and there is that kind of comedy, comity, that we haven't had here in a long time?
I was just thinking this morning about Joe Wilson, when Joe Wilson, Congressman of South Carolina,
of You Lie fame from the State of the Union address that President Obama gave. Right, the
State of the Union, You Lie. So I was trying to sort of say, when did this happen? Can people on the left or people who don't like Trump say, well, Trump elevated the rhetoric and it's his fault, his speeches, his locker up for Hillary. But no. We had this under Obama, and it started to decline, and the left and the right participates in this. I think it's become, unfortunately, bipartisan. So it's not directly attributed just to Donald Trump in 2015, 2016. It was happening before that, this sort of real visceral anger that really broke all the barriers. At school board meetings, you have people screaming hateful things. We just didn't have that 20 years ago. So am I optimistic that can turn the corner? I do think the pendulum switch, it it swings in American politics. So I do think there's a limit that people will tolerate in terms of this rhetoric.
On a Sunday morning, Professor Schiller, and of course the heritage here of George Washington traveling up near your Providence to Newport, Rhode Island, in a Jewish synagogue in the late 18th century, the distance,
the Toro Synagogue.
The distance of this shot that missed the president, wounding the former president, wounding him, is the distance from the Fifth Avenue Synagogue here in New York City, past St. Thomas Fifth Avenue, the church of Norman Rockwell's painting, down to St. Patrick's Cathedral. I mean, where, with the Milwaukee Convention, the president at church or coming out of church when he learns of former President Trump's attempted assassination, how does religion change with this assassination attempt as a debate and a construct in America?
Well, I mean, Tom, you're really tying something to the breakdown of local communities. It got exacerbated under COVID, but we used to see each other in contexts that were different than politics. Work, for example, church, synagogue, mosque, school, social gatherings. We used to interact with each other far more, personally, and we don't anymore. And the ability to dehumanize, we've seen this with mass shootings and young men. We see this now, and people are objects, they're not human beings, and we don't interact enough with each other outside of politics, where we recognize that we have bonds that connect us. And that is a sociological phenomenon that's been happening with the rise of technology and also, obviously, the pandemic. People talk about going back to work and how nice it is to work at home. Yes, we can all talk about those advantages if you're lucky enough to have them, but they do degrade social bonds in society. And politicians can't fix that. So we're looking to politicians to fix something that is really deeper and broader than what they can handle.
Dr. Schiller, you're heading up the Watson Institute here for a few more months, I gather, on an interim basis.
She's on sabbatical after that.
Deserve a sabbatical after that.
A little bit. I got a temporary raise. Yeah.
Very good. Very good.
Job, for the next year.
But you're thinking a lot, I imagine, and talking a lot about international relations. And I was struck, again, following this news, how quickly and in what droves we heard from world leaders about this. Give me your perspective on how this is resonating around the world, based on what we've read, what we've seen so far from world leaders. Obviously, there are plenty of opinions about the proliferation of guns in this country and violence and the rhetoric that we've been talking about. But what's your sense of how other world leaders are watching this unfold?
Well, I think there's a general sense. I mean, we've seen, a punch in the face or the shoulder, I think, in Copenhagen, the Prime Minister of Denmark. We've seen assassination in other parts of the country attempted, the world, like we've seen in Latin America, we've seen in Eastern Europe. So we are seeing political violence all over the world elevate to people who, I'm going to get punched on the streets of Copenhagen. So there's that, right? So I don't think there's that much surprise. And then, of course, there's the gun culture in America. But I think the fear among leaders is that the Trump rhetoric about international relations, and then when Trump can elevate that rhetoric in a way that's fairly feisty, it may concern them that this will solidify support around Trump, and that Trump will win. The election's over, and it's already done, and that we will be living with this on a world stage for the next 4 years. So I think international leaders are really trying to see how this assassination attempt, affects the election going forward, and does it intensify the negative partisanship, sort of the divide in the society.
Wendy Schiller, thank you so much. Professor Schiller at Brown University. I'm sure we'll hear from her as we progress to Milwaukee and Chicago as well. She has expertise on Capitol Hill and the legislative processes of the nation, but far more understands the pulse of the apparatus of our American politics. Forward, she's with Veda Partners. Henrietta, your thoughts when you learned of this in the vicinity of the 6:30 hour yesterday evening?
Thank you so much for having me this morning. It was shocking, what should have been a relatively quiet weekend, going into a lot of fanfare and pomp and circumstances of the convention ended up being something that I would say my first takeaway after being, just sort of shocked and awed by the entire event and, thankful that everybody was safe, including the former president, was really just the inevitability of it. It just feels so tense around America. I mean, that's certainly what blew up around me as this was happening, was just I can't believe that it happened. And yet at the same time, I absolutely can. Things are so fraught and tensions are so high that was really the first takeaway and the one that cemented in my mind after last night.
Talk more about that if you would. I'm on the same page as you, and I wonder if that's because of the way this general election is being framed. We're hearing of it as a very pivotal election, of course, one where democracy is at stake, where there's the risk of authoritarianism. If you listen to the Democrats, if you listen to the Republicans, Donald Trump on that debate stage talking about the very real prospects as he sees them of World War III. Is it that? Is it simply that discreetly, or is it something that's more of a consequence of a kind of slow evolution toward a messier and more fraught and more antagonistic brand of politics in this country?
I think you don't have to single either of those things out. I mean, they're both very valid. You can go back to January 6th, which was obviously something that, we saw, and there were certainly deaths, but our main takeaway was, gosh, it could have been so much worse. I mean, how many senators and lawmakers do we hear say that exact rephrase? Just expecting the worst and being grateful that it wasn't bad, more bad than that. And that's really the takeaway that I had from last night. Thankful that it wasn't worse. I think that sort of sense of everybody's out to get me is definitely the perspective from former President Trump. The trials and the convictions and the felony counts, everybody's out to get me kind of vibe. And then you get it from the president's side at the same time. The elites are against me. I mean, it's not quite the same thing, but there's just this victimhood sense and this view that everybody is being pilloried against either the president or the former president.
This is brilliant. This is why we love having Henrietta Treyz on. And the word I thought of, somewhat like the victim that Henrietta's talking about, David Gura, is just this sense of grievance across America, in our markets, in our discussion of Bloomberg elites and the haves, the asset owners in this America. There's almost a celebration of prosperity right now. And this is at the same time a nation, both parties feeling grievance.
Both parties feeling grievance. And Henrietta, if I could, I'd love to go back to sort of your experience working on Capitol Hill. You've worked on the north side and the south side, the House and the Senate. And in the hours since this attack, we have seen comments from elected representatives calling for committee hearings and investigations. Is that healthy as you see it, so soon after this, to kind of move ahead to that type of investigation? And sort of what do you want to see the role of official Washington and the legislative branch playing here as we learn more information?
I think it's appropriate to hold hearings and, make sure that the safety of any of our elected officials is paramount. I fear for that all the time. I'm one of the kinds of people who really respects a lot of our elected officials, and I want them to be safe so that more people will join the fray and we get better talent to join the ranks of the House and the Senate members. I think that serves America in general. So if there is to be hearings and to discuss the role of the Secret Service, I mean, all the things that went right, the former president is safe. He is sound. That's a testament to their good work. I don't know that committee hearings being weaponized is good for America. That's certainly something that we have seen. I certainly don't want to make a martyr of the shooter or anything along those lines, so I hope that that's handled with care. It's a fraught situation, and I think members are right to use whatever power they have to try to, really suss out all the details of the situation, because that's what the American public wants to see. They want to know what happened. And that's the role of Congress, and that's the role of oversight.
I've got to do reporting here now, Henrietta Treyz. I want to ask you a delicate question. Among our institutions of law enforcement in your Washington, is the Secret Service respected?
I think January 6th called a lot of the Secret Service into question, with the rally and with the licenses that have been granted. I think there's so much of that to go around, and I hope that they're able to answer a lot of questions this morning and in the days ahead, because they're going to get a lot of them.
David, your thoughts on that difficult question? You've lived it down there. Are they respected like, I think of CIA, FBI, and the rest of the alphabet soup I don't understand?
I think that they are. I think that Henrietta is right that there have been questions about them, and certainly there's been some scandal within the department in these recent years. And a person whose name has come up here in the last few hours is Kim Cheadle, who's the head of the Secret Service. And you had somebody like Elon Musk saying that she should step down, noting that she worked at PepsiCo. Well, she spent 30 years at the Secret Service before that. So I think there is going to be deserved scrutiny on the agency here in the weeks and months to come. But watching that video so many times as we all did, because it played over and over again, one had to admire the integrity of those who work for that agency in moving quickly to surround the president, get him off that stage and into a car safely. These are people who do take an oath to protect the president of the United States, and that is a very grave thing, Tom.
Henrietta, I want to talk about your Capitol Hill, and I guess we're not supposed to ask pure political questions now, but when you have Henrietta Treyz on the phone, that's where you end up.
Temptation to do so. Yeah.
Percolating out there in the Gura zeitgeist is a Republican sweep. How do you interpret people claiming or predicting or hoping or against a Republican sweep November 5th?
Well, I think that the 2020 election was a lot closer than people remember. I think that it took a global pandemic to have Joe Biden win. And I think that right now the Democratic Party is way behind where their voters are. And when that is the case, you either get depressed turnout or you get the independent and moderate voter base, which decides all American elections in just a handful of states, saying, you know what, I'm not voting for the Democratic Party right now. And they either stay home or they vote for Donald Trump. And you have to think that there's a rally around the flag moment right now, stemming from an assassination attempt, which is so jarring to so many people. It hasn't happened in decades in America. And it's something that I think will serve, hopefully, for a moment of solemnity and resignation is the last thing that you want. But definitely a sense of, this decision has serious consequences. The Democrats are in extreme disarray. And I think that the base case on the street right now, and certainly within D.C., is that this is portending a Republican wave. And what's been interesting about that, and I have struggled with, is that statistically, our odds have been 90% or higher that the Senate goes Republican, and it's only a 5% chance, in my view, that the House will flip to Democratic control in the event that former President Trump wins. Now it's not just a statistical red wave because of geography and which states are up this cycle. It just so happens that they're all in swing states where if the former president wins, he's going to win those Senate seats as well. It's really now more how many seats are we talking? Are we talking not just 51, 53 Senate seats, but 55, 56? Are we talking Republican gains in the House of 225 seats? Or are we talking 247 seats? That's the distinction that Democrats have to face right now, that it's not just a statistical red wave that we would expect to see given what's at stake and what seats are on, but is this a tsunami-style election? And I think that's what's happening in the race right now with Joe Biden's insistence that he's going to stay in.
The upside of it all. Henrietta Treyz, thank you so much for joining us. Your perspective incredibly valued. She, when we put her on the podcast, single best idea. I mean, it goes right.
Single best podcast.
It's just she's a star. But Henrietta Treyz, thank you so much. To show you how, folks, the world's been turned upside down, Steve Kornacki over at NBC just announces they're going to delay their poll. They were going to have a big fanfare today and announce it on Meet the Press. You will hear Meet the Press on Bloomberg Radio along with all the talk shows, arguably the most important day we've ever had of this service. 11 a.m., Meet the Press, 12 noon, Fox News Sunday, 1 p.m., the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos, and Face the Nation at 2 p.m. And thank you to Margaret Brennan for her commitment to all that we do here. But David, that shows how things are upside down, a poll with fanfare delayed.
And reasonably so. I mean, we're just left to wonder how this can reshape things and change the direction of this campaign. So we will watch closely, listen closely to all of those shows. I saw Senator Graham, Senator Sanders scheduled to be on Meet the Press. Very interested to hear what they have to say about the political atmosphere and what this means for the culture of America going forward.
Our conversation this morning to all of you across the nation and worldwide is we're hoping a measured conversation about our American politics, our American violence in this assassination attempt. And part of that is people with perspective and experience. David Gura, why don't you bring in our esteemed Rick Davis here with all of his work with Senator McCain and with President Reagan years ago.
And a familiar face on Bloomberg's Balance of Power, someone we hear from many days of the week, giving us perspective in real time on this campaign and politics in Washington. He's a partner at Rick Davis. We were talking about what this might mean for the politics, the campaign going forward. We're going to spend some time with you here after the break, but in the minute that we have here, what does the former president need to say when he takes the stage in Milwaukee? How does he take stock and give us his impression of what's happened here and how it reshapes the campaign going forward? What do you need to hear from him in Milwaukee?
I think going into yesterday, both sides had really hot rhetoric. It was, divisive on both sides, Democrats and Republicans, heat of the campaign, very close election, duking it out. And I think this is the moment for a pivot. I think, Donald Trump can take the high ground, and it's been offered to him. It's a moment in historic time, and it's going to be interesting to see how they capitalize on it. And by the way, distinctly different than how this convention has been organized message-wise going into tomorrow.
Rick Davis, we're going to come back. I don't want to squeeze you too short here. Mr. Davis in Milwaukee, of course, all of his service to the Republican Party. This is going to be a piercing conversation you're going to hear to get us to 9:30. We'll come back with Rick Davis. I don't know how you get from Milwaukee to Chicago. I mean, things, David Gura, have just been absolutely turned upside down.
Feels very day by day, and I just think of the circumstances that the Democratic Party is in, the current president is in, after that disastrous debate, so many people saying the way to quell those anxieties, move things forward, be out there more, take more questions, do more campaigning. He's now entering a period when the focus is going to shift squarely on the Republican Party as we move to this convention in Milwaukee. He has this opportunity for an interview with Lester Holt on Monday, but then there is a kind of necessary quiet that will set in, and I'm very curious to hear from Rick when we come back, sort of what his counsel would be to the current president about how to play a role in this very vital and important conversation about what this means for the country going forward.
Lots to speak about here. Nancy Cook, so experienced with Bloomberg, writing in her headline this morning, she reports bloodied, defiant Trump's image pumps up GOP base after shooting. And, of course, all that having to do with our coverage in Milwaukee. Joe Mathieu scheduled to be with us here this morning as well. As David Gura mentioned, Balance of Power headlining our coverage tomorrow in Milwaukee, and tonight, special coverage from 5 to 7 p.m. Worldwide on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio. David Gura and Tom Keene on this Sunday morning across the nation. A special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. David Gura and Tom Keene, a special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance from our world headquarters in New York, but we're utilizing all the resources of Bloomberg. A special thanks to Hadriana Lowenkron, who was in Butler, Pennsylvania yesterday. She is one of our newest, freshly minted reporters. And, David, you think about, you come out of University of Pennsylvania. She was an intern for Bloomberg Surveillance, worst job on the planet.
Survived that gauntlet,
and then you say, we need you in the crucible of news gathering to get it done. And someone like her and many others in Butler delivered the goods.
Yeah, and I can't say enough good things about the strength of our coverage of the former president's campaign. Stephanie Lai also traveling with the former president, and of course Jennifer Jacobs, who no one knows this former president better than she, and contributing to our coverage as well. So incredibly strong, as you say, Hadriana making her way from Western Pennsylvania now to Milwaukee, as we are on this Sunday morning.
In Milwaukee, and I want to frame out who this guy is. If you are from Arizona, he's a household name, a major advisor to the politics of the gentleman from Arizona. No, not Barry Goldwater, but Senator John McCain, and also his public service to the presidency of Ronald Reagan. Do you recall the assassination attempt at the Hilton Hotel of President Reagan? Can you give us a vignette, an anecdote of that horrific afternoon?
I was staff at the time, and we were assembled in a meeting actually right across from the White House in Lafayette Square, and somebody came in and said the president had been shot. Nobody knew what condition he was in. We immediately, turned on our television sets, and this was an era where we didn't have instant news, so there were special reports, and we immediately went over to the old executive office building next to the West Wing of the White House and met up with some of our colleagues. We knew all of the advanced people and Secret Service and his detail and protecting him. Great friends of mine from the campaign were involved in the incident, and it was a moment of stillness, where people didn't know what was going to happen next. It was actually very reminiscent of yesterday afternoon when the president went down, former President Trump went down, Secret Service were all over him, and it just reminded me of the scenes from Ronald Reagan where he was also tackled by the Secret Service in a protective crouch and thrust into the car. And at the time, everyone was assuming that he was okay. And little did we know, President Reagan had suffered a gunshot wound, life-threatening. And in this case, it was less harmful, but nonetheless dangerous. All I could think about was, that bullet came so close to creating a national disaster. And so we have a moment here where we can step back and say, look, is this really the politics we want? Is this the kind of environment we want to operate in? I've done a lot of presidential campaigns over the years, and this one had descended into a very dark place. And I'm hopeful that maybe this is a moment where both the professionals, the candidates, and the public can take a step back.
Rick Davis, you bring up that resonance. I think a lot of us had the same thought yesterday just about how we're talking about a matter of inches, if not centimeters here, and things could have been a world worse. But I think about sort of what we learned about the aftermath of that attempt on Ronald Reagan's life and the moments of humor that took place in the emergency room when he kind of paraphrased Jack Dempsey and told Nancy Reagan, honey, I forgot to duck. And we learned about how he processed what had happened, the attempt on his life, and then worked to move the nation forward. What can we learn from what happened back in 1981? What can we, Tom and I, and our listeners, but the country as well? And again, I'm looking for your prescription here of sort of how we process what's happened and how we turn that into something good and get the kind of change that you're talking about, the kind of cooler rhetoric that might prevail here.
Yeah, I think we look to our leaders to give us that kind of guidance. And I think that's why we're in the place we're at, because it's been very easy for our national leadership, whether it's the party out of power or party in power, to demagogue and create fear and govern that way. And I think Ronald Reagan showed us the way. He as you point out, he used humor to kind of calm the situation. And I thought I was looking very intently at President Biden's comments last night. People tune in; they want to know that there's not something bigger happening around all this, right? You wonder, is this just one event of a series? And I thought he did a good job. This is what Joe Biden does well, right? We've been very critical of President Biden for a lot of the things he's not been doing well lately, but in this case, he was empathetic. Even just the slight twist where he referred to Donald Trump as Donald. It was a nuance that I'm not sure he actually intended to do. But I think at that point, when he was standing talking to the American public, trying to calm their fears, he used a very colloquial address for the former president. And I thought that was from the heart. So I think it'll be interesting to see. The Biden campaign withdrew all their ads. Of course, they were all negative attack ads on Donald Trump. Very appropriate for the times. And so the next step will be Donald Trump's. He'll arrive here tomorrow in Milwaukee to address his supporters. What would normally be Red Meat Week. Normally we'd hear every attack on the president to try and get excited, the shock troops of the Republican Party. And it'll be interesting to see how that gets modulated, if it does. Again, this is a moment to address that kind of rhetoric. And I think the Democrats and the Biden campaign have done the first step in withdrawing these attack ads and going on national television and asking for unity. And I wouldn't be surprised that the President Trump does the same thing and uses this moment to address the nation in a different way. I know for sure that the program committee of the convention is rewriting a lot of speeches today. And so there are a lot of really smart guys sitting in a desk trying to crank out a completely different program than what they had going into this convention yesterday.
A whole different agenda. I want to ask you about what I mentioned when we went to break just a few minutes ago, and that is, as you were saying just a moment ago, you have President Biden pulling those ads, scaling back the outreach that they're making to voters. There is this marquee interview that's going to take place tomorrow in Texas with NBC News. But speak, if you would, to the pickle the White House finds itself in now, going quiet in the way that you think rightly they should be doing, the focus shifting here to Milwaukee and the Republican National Convention, but all the while still the specter of needing to do more, of needing to be out there, needing to show that this president has the competency and capacity to serve a second term in the White House. There have been so many advisors like yourself suggesting that what Joe Biden needs to do is more, be out there more, talking more, reaching out to voters more. Safe to say this complicates things so greatly.
Yeah, this is going to change everything for both sides, and I think it may inure to the benefit of the Democratic campaign, because right now they're in a tailspin. The turmoil that has existed in the Biden campaign since the debate performance that was subpar at best has really questioned whether or not they can even continue his candidacy. This will freeze everything. The combination of this incident, an assassination attempt on a former president, and the Republican convention here will really change the spotlight. It's all been on Joe Biden, and we've watched his every public appearance with holding our breath for fear that we'd see that same kind of performance, and he's done better, right? And he's stabilized a bit, but this gives him a breather. This will change the focus from him to Donald Trump, and our eyes will not be focused on Biden and his campaign for some time. It'll take at least a week for this convention to go through its paces, the president to take advantage of the situation he finds himself in. The entire world will be riveted to his speech here on Thursday night, accepting the nomination and putting the campaign on a new dialogue with the American public, and it'll be probably the most important speech Donald Trump gives in his entire life.
Rick Davis, I have to ask this. It's a little bit off, but unfortunately I don't think it's off. Full disclosure, folks, my father was a life member of the NRA. He was someone who adored hunting and being out in the fields and that. Rick Davis, you grew up with 20 Mule Team Ronald Reagan, and he loved to get on the horse and go through the tundra of California showing the West. You are intimately affected by an edge of Purple Strait, Arizona, where there is a culture of the West. We saw yesterday the continuing culture of weapons, of guns, of AK whatevers in America. Can this be a seismic moment where we finally figure out this affair with weaponry in America?
Tom, it's a really good question. And we ask this question every time there's a school shooting.
But this is different.
A massive.
The school shootings are appalling. Yes. But, this changes the dialogue, I would respectfully suggest.
I would hope so. I've expected some kind of event that would finally force an open and honest discussion about the use of military-grade weapons in society. And this is a riveting moment to have that conversation. Unfortunately, coming at the tail end of a Congress, at the end of an administration, and in the heat of a campaign, it's going to blunt that conversation. I can't imagine anything productive happening in Washington, D.C. right now, considering the state of our politics. Maybe this is the moment where everyone takes a step back, and I think that's going to be completely in the category of something Donald Trump is responsible for. He has this chance. Democrats can't do this. Democrats can't go to the well and say, another example of why we need to ban assault weapons. Only Donald Trump could actually shake the foundation of that Second Amendment crowd within our party to say, okay, we've had enough. And we have to do something about this. And certainly you'd find common cause with most of Congress right now who have been on the precipice of doing something about this, but just haven't had the catalyst like this to take real action. But the winds against it are strong. The timing is bad. From a legislative point of view, getting anything out of Congress, as we've seen in the last 6 months, is virtually impossible. But it doesn't mean that it can't still happen. And I think that's part of the message that Donald Trump has the opportunity to give to the convention, because it's only when you change your own party that things happen. You never make progress by attacking the opposition. That's sort of standard operating procedure. And what I used to love about John McCain is he believed in pox on both the houses. Right? He would go after Republicans as much as he would go after Democrats, and that made it effective because his intentions were honest in that regard.
Rick, very quickly here, you bring up your former boss, the late Senator John McCain, and I think there were a few people who warned about our deteriorating politics more and more forcefully than he did. When you look at what's happened since he was issuing those clarion calls about where things were headed, how dark things were likely to become, do you see a missed opportunity? Was this kind of an inevitable roll downhill to where we are today, or was there something more that you think could have been done, a particular moment that politicians of both stripes could have done more?
Oh, sure. In retrospect, you can always find moments that could have been different, right? Even at the start of the Biden presidency, he actually could have. I've heard this many times. I thought it was brilliant. I think my friend Mitt Romney had said something about, Biden should have just pardoned Trump, right? Could you imagine the tumult we would have missed if there had not been this aggressive effort to prosecute him, regardless of whether you think he's guilty or innocent. And of course, he's been proven guilty by a jury of his peers. But that put the country through a very, very difficult time. I just remember here we are in Wisconsin, the presence of mind of my friend John McCain at a town hall in the heat of the campaign. And a woman looks at him in a big crowd and she says, while he's on camera, that Barack Obama is a Muslim and he's out to hurt America. And John McCain stood up in a group of supporters and said, no, ma'am, no. He's a good man. He's a good family man. And we just have a disagreement on how to run the country. I mean, the presence of mind to do that in the heat of the moment is what distinguishes good politicians from great politicians. And I think this is a moment in time. This is the Trump opportunity to do the same thing. Standing in a group of his supporters on Thursday night, he can change the political dynamic right now.
Rick Davis, thank you for decades of perspective. Rick Davis, of course, with Joe Mathieu and Kayleigh Lines in Milwaukee. Speaking of which, we get a short moment here with Joe Mathieu, and then we'll come back for extended comments with Joe Mathieu. He is leading our coverage in Milwaukee. Joe Mathieu, how did your coverage change last night, 6:30?
Well, it's a great question here because it's still changing. I think that this 24-hour period between the time those shots rang out and when we are on the air, and then another 24 hours before the start of this convention, you're going to see a lot more changes, which is why I'm really urging people to not try to be in the business of predicting things. This is a pretty dark feeling, I'll be honest with you, this morning in Milwaukee, and a lot of folks were bewildered last evening. We were on the plane when this news broke with a lot of politicos and a lot of media types, and it's just one of those moments where you have to try to project as little as possible and take the news in, and that's what we're going to do today on Bloomberg.
Joe, we see that the former president indeed is going to Milwaukee, planning to give that speech on Thursday, but also saying that he's going to be a large presence throughout the proceedings over the course of the week. Is that a change? Did we expect to see him there as early? And what will you be watching for as these get underway? Tom making the very astute observation a little while ago. Conventions have a lot of speakers. Some are more important than others. Some are more marquee than others, have more important things to say. Of course, we're waiting for the vice presidential pick as well. Do you get a sense this will be much more closely watched now as a result of this?
Oh, it surely will be. This could be the most watched political convention in history. When you consider the moment we were already in with Joe Biden, now this is an incredible moment, regardless of your politics. But you ask a great question. In 2016, Donald Trump kind of upended the tradition of holding the nominee until the last night. It's like you don't see the bride before the wedding here. And Donald Trump came out on the first night. He would pop his head outside on the stage just to wave to get a round of applause. He didn't want to let a night go by without soaking it up. And I suspect that will be the go forward here. My bigger question is, when do we first see him in public? What will be the staging? Will he look when he's in front of cameras the first time? Probably today.
So, Mathieu, how will particularly the Republican Party, away from the core constituency of President Trump, how do they move on in Milwaukee?
Well, my gosh, we haven't even started yet. So the idea of moving on from this is going to take a minute here. I just see a choice. This could go a couple of different ways. At some point, we'll see Donald Trump in front of a camera today. His demeanor is going to mean a lot. He's going to be cleaned up. He'll probably be bandaged. Will he appear with members of the Secret Service? Is that politically sound at this moment? Those are some of the questions around the optics that I have here. But look, there was a real tone of retribution around this program. Martyrdom. Dana White from the UFC is going to be speaking, it looks like, on Thursday night when the former president of the United States receives this nomination. If they lean into that, it's going to be an important moment. If Donald Trump decides to embrace moderation here, it too will be important, and I'm not sure that they have even arrived in that place yet. We're just waking up today with a lot of people having a sense of where they want to go, having slept on it, and there's just great uncertainty around this whole program. Rick Davis talked about it. You remember his convention in 2008. I was in the Twin Cities for that. There was a hurricane on the Gulf Coast on the first day of that convention. They had to change their plans on the spot to avoid a split screen that could have been very damaging to the nominee. In this case, they're going to have to make decisions like that as well in real time.
I remember that well, and remember how it contrasted with what the Democrats had in Denver that year, which was a convention the likes of which we hadn't seen before, both in terms of scale and scope, filling up Mile High Stadium with folks for Barack Obama's address then. I imagine, Joe, you're doing what I'm doing, which is, we have this kind of skeleton agenda that we've gotten from the Republican National Committee and the convention, detailing which delegation is going to be where for what, and movies and all kinds of things like that. And then, before this happened yesterday, we got this kind of comprehensive list of who the headliners are going to be at the convention. And you mentioned Dana White as one of them, but you look at who else is on here. Certainly all of the front runners for that vice presidential position, various campaign advisors. Lee Greenwood is on there as well. What can you divine from looking at that list? You talked about grievance and retribution. What does it tell you, just that list of 30 or 40 names that we got from the Trump campaign over the weekend?
It's interesting. It was the number of senators that kind of blew me away, considering the idea that this was such a controversial figure coming out of January 6th.
Almost a dozen of them, I think, if I count right.
That is right. Of course, a couple of them would like to be vice president. No big shockers there. I mean, look, to see Dana White on stage is going to be bizarre. Amber Rose, this is part of the job at a convention like this. But how will that list change? There's one name that was taken off the list of speakers, and that's Melania Trump. Now, after what we just experienced here in this country, are you telling me that the former First Lady will not appear on stage with Donald Trump or will not say words at the podium? I think those are the kind of details they're coming back around on now when it comes to that speakers list.
Remarkable, Tom. And the list is divided between entertainers, celebrities, industry leaders, members of Congress, and then family. So as Joe rightly mentioned, we've got Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, Laura Trump, who's the co-chairman of the RNC, and Kim Guilfoyle
to both of you, and David, let me go to you here, and then it's just Joe and Jeanne, Sheehan and Zaino waiting for us. David, that's always the case. This horrific event is happening, but I don't think anybody's consulted out. President Trump needs to decide how President Trump will change Milwaukee, period.
I think that's the case. And we talked a little bit about the piece that Tim Alberta wrote for The Atlantic at the top of the show, really looking at this campaign, the kind of campaign that Donald Trump is running this time around. Susie Wiles heading it up. And I know that we're going to come back to Joe here in just a little bit, but I'm eager to hear sort of the degree to which the former president is shaping this, the degree to which he's going to defer to the leadership of that campaign, if they're going to maintain the kind of discipline that they've had here leading up to this, which if you look at the polls, look at how things are going, has clearly worked so effectively for them.
Joe, we're going to let you go and come back, but quickly here, they're going to move the perimeters in Milwaukee. Are you and your team coverage going to be pushed out to Whitefish Bay?
Look, we could be enveloped by the perimeters. That's the one thing that we're waiting to find out, because we were kind of on the edge of it right now. Bloomberg has a bit of a house set up here. So whether we're engulfed or not, I will say it's probably a good time to not be in the perimeter, because it's going to be harder to get in there than it is in the airport today.
It's like real world balance of power.
It is.
They've got a house. I love that. We're missing out, Tom.
Kaylee Lines and Joe Mathieu leading our coverage. And again, Joe will join us here this morning in their special coverage tonight at 5 p.m. worldwide on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg Television as well. She has been patient. She is of Iona University. Jeanne Sheehan Zaino joins us right now. Jeanne, just to begin the coverage here, your thoughts on this horrific event of yesterday.
Well, we are all so lucky that the former president, is a close call. That was
I don't mean to interrupt, Jeanne, but that was my first thought this morning when I woke up after no sleep tonight. Continue.
Yeah, me as well, Tom. And how close he came. I mean, we are all so grateful for that. And I think the questions you were just all talking about with Joe are the ones that I have. How does this impact the convention? Certainly the program. We expect now they will have a moment of silence for the victims of this shooting. These iconic photos which portray the former president as in a show of strength. I mean, the idea that he could stand up after being shot, put his fist in the air and say, fight, fight, fight. These are iconic images, and certainly the delegates here, the base of the party, they are both grateful and angry, and we heard some of that anger yesterday, and I think we'll hear more of that. People like J.D. Vance, who very well could be the vice presidential nominee, he just a few hours after this horrific incident blamed it on Joe Biden's rhetoric. And that is not something that is isolated. That is something you hear from the Republican base, that they are angry. And so how that anger is, transfers into the convention hall, these are all things that we're going to be watching for here.
I saw that tweet as well from the junior senator of Ohio. That rhetoric led directly to the assassination attempt of Donald Trump, and we'll see here in the coming hours how widely that's embraced by other members of the Republican Party, certainly. I'm curious. I know that you have a background in public opinion polling and research, and Tom has rightly said we don't want to dwell too much here on the politics and what this means for the campaign itself at this moment in time. But when you look at sort of where things were and how this is likely to change the terrain, the political terrain here going into Milwaukee, what are your expectations as we come from 2 weeks back, that disastrous debate in Atlanta, the effort on the White House's part to change course, get President Biden out there more? We now have this seismic event in this campaign, seismic event in American political history. How do you see it reshaping the landscape?
I'm not sure it's going to change public opinion polling much. The anger that we were just talking about reflected by J.D. Vance, that is reflected in the base. And these are people who have supported and will continue to support the former president. They need to reach out to those sort of Nikki Haley voters, moderates, independents. And the question is, does this change anything for that small segment of the population? We haven't seen much movement there yet. I'm not sure we're going to see that. But if you look at history and you look at, say, the shooting of President Reagan just, months into his presidency, you did see a change in the public opinion support for the former president. Obviously, very different time and circumstances, but he was a polarizing figure, and his public opinion support increased after his shooting. So that is a possibility as well.
Jeanne, thank you so much. We're out of time. It's way too short a visit with you. I've got about 8 more questions, including the purpleness of some of these swing states. But we'll get much more from Jeanne Sheehan Zaino of Iona University, I should say, in New Rochelle. She's a wonderful advisor to Bloomberg with perspective and through Milwaukee and Chicago. David, what do you have?
We were talking with Joe just about security in Milwaukee, and Michael Whatley, who's the chairperson of the Republican National Committee, was on Fox News Sunday this morning, asked about security at that convention. Didn't get into specifics, according to our colleagues who were following all the commentary on these shows this morning, but did say the GOP is working with 40 different law enforcement agencies. He said, quote, "This is going to be a facility where we're going to be able to have 50,000 delegates and alternates and guests and members of the media who are going to be here and who are going to be safe." That is very critical for us. Again, the chairperson of the Republican National Committee.
On Bloomberg Radio and across all of our digital services, David Gura and Tom Keene, a special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance. The team has worked through the night. I think there's a couple all-nighters. It's just like in the old days, all-nighters to get yourself to the finals. A special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene with David Gura from our studios in New York. We're trying to do conversation forward after this horrific assassination attempt. And David, you mentioned it, the shock of it only really beginning to settle in for me with all of the images and all of the modern news coverage. There's just that cadence. It is true shock that we process over a violence of this. You mentioned earlier the New York Times photograph of the image of a bullet passing by the former president.
Doug Mills capturing that photograph, and there was this pool of 4 or 5 photographers there at the base of the stage in Butler, Pennsylvania. You saw those photographers scramble to capture some truly disturbing and iconic images of the former president as he fell to the ground and was surrounded by members of the Secret Service. We're looking ahead to Milwaukee, but before we get there, we have to stop in Washington, D.C. That is where this hour, President Biden is scheduled to be briefed once again by law enforcement and Homeland Security officials on, again, what's happened in Pennsylvania, the status of that investigation, but also sort of what this means politically, what this means for the country culturally. These are paramount questions as we move to the start of the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee tomorrow, Tom.
And David, before we get to Hadriana, she's in the airport in Pittsburgh, and we'll capture her before she heads off to Milwaukee. The Sunday talk shows, of which Bloomberg Radio has been committed to well over a decade, we'll have 4 hours of the talk shows for you starting at 11 a.m. here in 58 minutes. About them, they are a settling point. I'm going to be blunt, for the elites of America. You've lived it. You've done them. What is the impact of these Sunday talk shows among the Beltway crew this morning as they adjust to Milwaukee and then Chicago?
Well, having lived it, no night is longer than Saturday night going into one of these shows, particularly if news happens. And we haven't seen news like this, obviously, in some time. But I know that Margaret Brennan, the host of Face the Nation, has been candid about this with you on air as well. The shows try their best to get the most salient comments from guests, the best guests that they can get for that Sunday morning. And we see that in terms of who's on them. We were talking just a moment ago about the chairman of the RNC was on Fox News Sunday talking about plans for Milwaukee. We know that Chris Coons, the senator from Delaware, a close friend and confidant of President Joe Biden, is going to be on Meet the Press this morning. I'm very interested to hear what he has to say, yes, about the state of that campaign, the state of his friend, Joe Biden, who one can only imagine has been shaken by what's happened here as well, and what the Democratic Party's plans are going forward here, as they really have no choice but to watch what unfolds in Milwaukee over these next few days.
In the mountains of western Pennsylvania, in the Appalachia of coal, which, as David mentioned, used to be turned into steel, a little bit still today, there is one lonely plateau, and they decided to plant an airport on top of it. It's really challenging, to say the least. PIT is a Pittsburgh airport, and there, Hadriana Lowenkron joins us right now, of course, with Bloomberg News, our White House correspondent. Hadriana, what have you learned in the last hour?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me on here. Again, as you mentioned, we're looking ahead to Milwaukee. We just received a memo from the Trump campaign that they were enhancing armed security. What's also, that we're investigating is what will happen to future big outdoor events like this. How will these types of rallies continue? How will campaigning continue? And as you mentioned, we have people up, guests, lawmakers, people in charge of the RNC on all these talk shows, everyone is figuring this out for the first time. But the security at the convention, who the VP is, what it means to have a VP in terms of someone who is able to take on the job of the president should something like this happen across both parties, is something that we're chasing right now.
Tom, Hadriana is hitting on something that I've thought a lot about, having read presidential memoirs before political memoirs. There is this very sobering moment. If you're picked to be the vice presidential nominee, with that comes the immediate onslaught of having a security apparatus surround you. And with that, I think, an awareness of the fact that you are doing something that could potentially have great personal peril. And of course, that was in stark relief last night in Western Pennsylvania. Hadriana, let me get back to something you said just a moment ago, which is the importance of these rallies to this campaign. And I think looking back on 2016 and 2020 to some extent, although we had the pandemic interceding, this is stock and trade for Donald Trump. He loves to do these big events. He had 15,000 people in that field in Western Pennsylvania yesterday. What would it mean if, pushing ahead to November, after this convention, there is, shall we say, a reduced interest in doing big events like this? I'm struck by what we were all talking about going into that debate in Atlanta a few weeks ago. There was some speculation among the chattering class that format wasn't going to serve Donald Trump well because there wouldn't be an audience. He wouldn't be able to fulminate and have the warm reception of those who had gathered in the crowd. I think in actual fact, he played it pretty well. He didn't need that audience, and he stayed very focused and very disciplined. What does it mean for this campaign if, as you suggest, there could be a moment here now where it becomes unpalatable or unadvised or not interesting to this campaign to have those kind of big crowds and big events that it's had for the last two times we've mounted a presidential campaign? Donald Trump has.
Right. So as you just mentioned, the rallies have been a huge part, and Trump thrives off of the audience there. But he is able to do more. First of all, of course, he already has the ID, the name recognition. This is something we were thinking about a while ago when all of the indictments came about, and we weren't sure to what extent he would be locked in the courtroom. As we all know, when he was in New York, he was able to have some smaller events, still pulling in the press, still keeping the attention on him. So he's definitely, able to kind of work around it. Something else that's been really big, social media. He is on Truth Social, his platform, frequently, and a lot of other people are tapped into that. So he is still finding so many other channels to communicate with his base. And not to mention, rallies are expensive. Right now he has actually kind of caught up with Biden in the money race, exceeded him even. But before that, when our reporting was showing that rallies were a big source of a money drain from him. And this could be something that could prove to be cost effective as well. Safe travels.
Hadriana Lowenkron.
Stow the tray table. Board the plane and stow the tray table. She's got to get to Milwaukee.
Butler, Pennsylvania to Pittsburgh and on to Milwaukee, where she will assist in our coverage. Joe Mathieu and Kaylee Lines here. Look for their coverage tonight at 5 p.m. across all that we're doing. One of the great rules, and the first time I ever ran into this, folks, was in New Hampshire. I honestly can't remember if it was Concord. I'll say it was Manchester. One of the most interesting hotels in the world is the Radisson Hotel in Madison, where there's a rotunda. And a million years ago, we were all there doing the political thing that you do in the New Hampshire primary. And I looked at everybody's cell phone, which probably then was a Palm Pilot, and everyone was looking at this new thing called Politico. There is something about being weaned at Politico which makes you a different reporter. Nancy Cook, for years at Politico, an institution there, and we are thrilled that she is our senior national correspondent this morning.
Good friend of the show, friend of mine as well. Nancy, great to speak with you. Yes, weaned at Politico, raised here at Bloomberg, where she covered the Trump campaign, all 4 years of it. Nancy, you and I have been talking a lot about the way that Donald Trump has been waging this particular campaign, about the role that Susie Wiles has been playing, about his advisors' ability to keep him focused, keep him talking about what they think the American public wants to hear about, getting him to suppress some of the things that he, let's just say it, likes to talk about and focus on. How much confidence do you have in their ability to be listening very closely to what he has to say whenever he says it after this attack yesterday? But do you have confidence that has staying power, their emphasis that they've placed to him that he needs to stay focused?
I think that what happened last night, which was terrifying and tragic, just objectively, will focus him even more. He is going to head into the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, where I am right now, I think with such a sense of purpose and such a clear message that, his enemies are after him. This is going to turn him into even more of a movement figure. It's going to give his supporters even more of a sense of him as a fighter. And it has really, I think, rallied the country around him because, of course, no one wants this type of political violence. And we've seen already the Biden campaign saying they're going to pull down negative ads. They're going to go dark for a little while. So this really gives Trump, I think, for most of the week, the stage. And I think that he will be very disciplined and understand how to use this moment because regardless of what you think of him, he does have excellent political instincts.
Nancy, I want to ask you about 5 seconds in what happened yesterday. Not when he was shot and when he fell to the floor, but what we were talking about with Jeanne Zaino just a moment ago. That is the moment he stands up and raises his fist and says fight to the crowd. There was an incredible wherewithal to that, an awareness of the fact that, look, the unthinkable had happened. He'd been forced to the floor. He's bleeding out of his right ear. And yet there is this quintessential Donald Trumpian awareness of the fact that he is, yes, surrounded by those 15,000 people. Perhaps he saw Doug Mills there with his camera and others. But he grasped the importance and lasting significance of that moment and wanting to shape it in the way that he so clearly has during the course of his political career and business career before that.
Absolutely. And the image that was taken of that moment with him with his fist raised above, there's blood streaming down his face, his right ear is bloody, and there's an American flag sort of waving behind him as he's surrounded by Secret Service agents is iconic now. And it's iconic sort of in the country, but you also saw a lot of senators yesterday and Republicans and all these people sharing it on social media as sort of more evidence of what a fighter he is. And to me, they were talking about, the fact that he survived the 34 felony convictions, 2 impeachment trials, an assassination attempt. For his supporters, This just adds to the lore of what he is able to overcome and his resiliency.
What is his dynamic right now with the Republican middle? In the grind of doing Bloomberg surveillance, Nancy, this has been a constant theme. The loyalists, as we saw in Butler, Pennsylvania, they're not going to budge. They're going to be completely engaged. But what is the relationship now versus 4 years ago of former President Trump with the Republican middle?
I think that the relationship between him and the Republican middle is still a little tricky. We have seen white suburban women, for instance, still not come back to support him. And so I think just politically, the gamble that they're trying to make for this election is, even if you can't get white suburban women, let's say, to vote for you, they are going after voters who typically do not vote Republican. They're going after younger black men. They're going after Hispanics. We're seeing polling shows that Hispanics are really turning back towards Trump. And so they're trying to actually build a new coalition for this election. And It may work, it may not, but that is their strategy.
Nancy Cook, thank you so much for the generous time today as you prepare for your work in Milwaukee. Nancy Cook, our senior national correspondent. It is a joy now to turn to Greg Valliere of New Hampshire, understanding that he Ford in Sacramento, Ronald Reagan outside the Hilton Hotel. I would make a joke of James Garfield in 1881, but that was just before.
We know that you were the only one
just
there, Tom.
Before Valliere. Greg, it is an American curse, this assassination surviving, I should say, as well. Your thoughts of how Donald Trump will change?
Well, this is a huge event for him, Tom. Good to be with you, not under these circumstances. But I do think that for Trump, this is going to be a defining moment. I think he has the opportunity to become an icon. The photo will become iconic. And you got to say Donald Trump is the clear favorite to win the election.
Greg, picking up on that, and we've asked a number of folks about this, eager to get your perspective on it as well. What does he have to say on Thursday? What would you like to hear him say on Thursday? How does he acknowledge what's happened? How does he move us, the country, forward?
I think he needs to lower the temperature, David, and he has been, ironically, in the last few weeks, been lowering the temperature a bit. So I think he needs to be magnanimous. He needs to tone it down, and if he does, he picks up that last group that he needs that you guys were just talking about, and that's the moderate centrist voters. I think he has a chance now to win them as well.
Tom, asking about what happened in the 70s, those two attempts on Gerald Ford, which happened in pretty quick succession, there was a degree to which we weren't, I won't say we were inured to it, but this was a more regular thing. And then we've had this lapse, and we've talked about what happened to Steve Scalise. We've talked about what happened to Gabrielle Giffords, but no targeting of presidents or presidential candidates in many decades. This is novel territory, or a territory that we haven't trod in some time. What does it signal to you culturally that we're here again?
Well, we can't relax. I mean, we still have to worry about these types of threats. I mean, I'm sure people have said this morning to you guys, a quarter of an inch, and we'd be having a totally different conversation. I think there's also going to have to be a really tough scrutiny of security around Trump. A lot of people saw this guy with a rifle, and nobody took him out, and I think that's going to have to be explored.
I look, Greg Valliere, at the scope of this, and I am wedded to the tradition that you and I grew up with. Gura is far too young to remember this. But essentially, we have modern conventions that are constructed media events to stagger to a film opportunity to run tape in October and into November. Did that equation change yesterday evening?
A bit. I have to say, just to reiterate, I think this makes Trump an iconic figure. The blood streaming down his face, the defiant fist clench. I mean, this is going to be the image that we'll see between now and November 5th. And barring something extraordinary, some huge gaffe by Trump, he's going to win.
And both of you weigh in here. David Gura, I'm going to go to you first of all. And there's people that have written speeches for presidents. Do you actually believe that Donald Trump is a speechwriter, or is he going to ad-lib this as only he can do?
I go back to what we were talking about with Nancy, and I'm eager for Greg to jump in here as well. I just feel like, and my sense is, from all that I've read and heard from Nancy and others, that this campaign is more professional than past campaigns that Donald Trump has waged. He has folks running it who are experienced, more than competent, and again, very professional. And so to answer your question, who knows how much he will ad-lib, be extemporaneous. We know that he likes to do that. But I think that he has the structure in place in this campaign to guide him in delivering a speech that will be effective and effectively capture this moment. And Greg, I'd love to hear from you if you feel the same way, that it feels different than it did the last two times.
Absolutely, David. I was just going to make the point that I think the campaign already was doing well before this incident yesterday. They had toned it down. They got a sharper edge. They have top people running the campaign. So he was the front runner, clearly, even before what happened yesterday.
I've had a number of these conversations, Tom, with people who support the former president and don't, talking about the debate. Yes, we've focused a lot on the way that Joe Biden has comported himself during the course of that disastrous debate for him. And then there are people who don't like the former president and say, oh, but he lied all these times. How can you ignore that? I think, Tom, picking up on what Greg was saying there, there was a focus and an awareness of the space and the forum for that debate that I think exemplifies what Greg and I have been talking about here. That is just an awareness of what he needs to do to wage this campaign effectively.
Greg Valliere, the seminal event here of the next 48 hours is a vice president for, as I recall, a 78-year-old wounded former president. I mean, I'm not going to, I don't need theater here of like, how is the vice presidential choice changed? But it's ever more important now after what we've witnessed.
Absolutely. The realities are stark right now. So I think he's got to pick somebody with experience, someone who can step in immediately. It almost has to be, in my mind, Marco Rubio, but I've been wrong before. I could be wrong again.
How can he do that with two people from Florida?
Rubio moves. Rubio gets a condo in D.C. or New York, whatever. That don't forget, Karl Rove, who was the running mate for...
That's okay, Greg. You're allowed to have brain freezes on Bloomberg surveillance. It happens on a daily basis.
Dick Cheney, I'm sorry. Yes. So Dick Cheney did the same thing. He changed his residency, and nobody said very much about it.
When you look at what the former president is considering, And here's where I'll draw the contrast. We've talked a lot about this tweet from J.D. Vance last night, drawing this direct line to what he says is Joe Biden's rhetoric and what happened to Donald Trump last night. Does that affect this in any way, this person's approach to what happened yesterday, or does this go beyond that? Give us your sense, give us Greg Valliere's sense of what Donald Trump wants or what Donald Trump needs in a running mate this time around.
I think if he wants to go for comfort, he goes for the North Dakota Senator Burgum. I think they get along very well. They're both on the same wavelength. But Burgum has no name recognition, and I think you've got to get somebody with the name recognition. Again, if you want somebody with a good background in geopolitics, somebody who really knows how Washington works, Rubio is the logical choice.
What about Nikki Haley? Terry Haines and others have said to us that this is a point, as you say, a more presidential Donald Trump would be more political. Go back to Harold Stassen. You're the only ones, Greg, you and I are the only ones who know who Harold Stassen is. But is this a point where we see Trump-Haley?
No, you got to say, Tom, that she doesn't like him, he doesn't like her. They do not get along. I would be very surprised if she said yes. I've not heard anything about her being vetted. That would be a big upset.
Greg Valliere, thank you for the time. Always generous with us with AGF Investments. Really the first morning note on this. David?
Yeah, picking up on what we were just talking about there, I was down in Atlanta covering that debate, and there has been this very showman-like aspect to the selection process. And so leading up to that debate and afterward when the surrogates flooded the floor of the spin room, Nikki Haley absent from all of that, but you did see Doug Burgum, you saw Tim Scott, you saw J.D. Vance on the floor there. So it seems clear to me that would be a real sleeper pick from Donald Trump if he picks Nikki Haley. Others have been kind of brought out, trumpeted out, trotted out to be shown to the public here leading up to this decision.
We are now going to turn to a difficult topic, and we are going to do it respect for his public service to those of the Pentagon and the CIA. Mick Mulroy, I think I spoke to him in the last 72 hours. Mick, I honestly can't remember all sorts of accolades here that you have done, but one of those accolades is to actually hold a weapon in your hands and feel the pressure. And I'm not talking about a .22 or even some form of societal pistol. I'm talking about whatever was alleged to be used as a rifle in this attempted assassination. How accurate is the reported AR style, in your professional ability, Mick, in the military? How accurate can an AR style rifle be, scope or no scope, from that distance?
So good to be with you, Tom and David, after this horrible event. Essentially, an AR-15 is the civilian equivalent to an M16 or an M4. So the same weapons that are carried in the U.S. military and the CIA. It's the same. It just has a few modifications, like it cannot shoot a 3-round burst, for example. But essentially, you don't need that anyway. So it is designed to be incredibly accurate by people who, quite frankly, are at the basic level of the Army or the Marine Corps. And I can tell you, as a former Marine, that the average Marine could make this shot without optics almost any day. And I don't mean that to trumpet anything. It's 150 yards away from an elevated position with a direct line of sight. So it is just luck, I think, and I don't know if this individual had any training or his background, but I think it's just luck that it didn't kill former President Trump.
This was a source of conversation at the dining room table last night, and what I said to one of the cherubs was, you have to have a quiet when firing a rifle for accuracy, and most of us, including me, David Gura, and a 20-year-old lost in Western Pennsylvania, don't have that quiet. I mean, basically, the reason President Trump is alive is because an amateur held a weapon you were professional in. Am I close there?
It could be, yes. It could be that. It could be that there was, a gust of wind that happened at the last second. That I don't know, but the prone position, which apparently he was in, with that style of weapon, an AR-15, which is very accurate, I am assuming he had optics because they're almost everywhere now. But even with iron sights, it's not a difficult shot. So I think even a person who had never shot before, within a half a day of training, could have made that shot, quite frankly. And I do believe it was just luck or something else happened that intervened. He slipped. He was spotted. I don't know. He obviously was taking a headshot. Most people would have tried to shoot for, mid-torso. But I don't know. I don't want to get too into
Sure,
things
of course.
I don't know, but it's just not.
Of course.
It is not that difficult to shot. And as brave as the Secret Service was that got up there and covered him, this was a big breakdown in security. There should not have been somebody on a roof at that location. There should have been some kind of law enforcement presence at that location.
Just a few hundred feet away from the stage there in Butler, Pennsylvania. And you're right in pointing out, Mick, I mean, there's a lot we don't know here, a wide vacuum of information that presumably will be filled in the coming days. And we're hearing that there'll be hearings with Secret Service leadership as well. Mick, I want to ask you about political violence and what this signals for you. And we've talked a lot about historical precedent here, analogs throughout modern history, and how there was a relative calm, at least when it comes to assassinations or attempted assassinations of political figures. How do you see this changing that? What do you say to somebody who watches what's happened here and fears greatly that this itself may have been an isolated incident, but what's been at play here could snowball further?
Well, I think it's safe to say that we're seeing a rise of both extremes, both on the far left and the far right. And not only a rise in violent rhetoric, but the capacity to do violence. So arming themselves, both sides. A lot of these groups are looking for a reason, right? They are looking for a cause to get behind, to do things that would promote their political agenda, as extreme as it is, based on some kind of impetus. This could be an impetus. We don't know what this individual's motivation was. Was he doing it for political reasons, or was he just mentally disturbed and thought that this was going to somehow get him some attention? I don't know, but it probably doesn't matter to those extremist groups that were looking for a reason. So I believe the FBI, the DHS, and is going to be looking for talk right now, chatter on a lot of these alternative social media sites that are used about some kind of retaliation of this. Who they'd retaliate against, I don't know, but logic might not rule the day here. I think this is an indication of what has been growing, and we've seen all sorts of political violence, including January 6th. And this could be the tip of the iceberg. It could be something that creates a cascading effect. Hopefully that doesn't happen, and I'm sure that people are worried about that.
Let me pull a thread there, because I heard Juliet Keim at the Kennedy School on CNN yesterday talking about how in a situation like this, the motive is rarely clear-cut. You look back on what happened with Reagan, for example. Can you comment on that? Just sort of the work that will be undertaken here to find out what that motive is. Again, there's a lot of sort of basic investigative work that needs to happen here about the security breakdown and all of that. But when we get down to figuring out who this person was, what made him tick and why he did that, how complicated a process is that? And conversely, what's that likely to show about the complicatedness of that individual?
Sure. So I think there's two parts I'd highlight to that. One, people are going to use whatever they want for their reasoning behind why this individual did what they did. Social media is now everywhere, and our adversaries see it, and they just magnify it. So if somebody spreads the rumor that this person was, a political opponent of former President Trump, and he did this for a little more, that's going to get out there pretty quick, and the Russians and Chinese and Iranians are going to spread it. It's just a fact. But you are right. There are many reasons. You referenced President Reagan's attempted assassination. That person was doing it to impress a movie actress, right? It had nothing to do, from my memory, political. But and if that's the case here, it needs to come out relatively quick. It certainly wouldn't make it any better necessarily, but hopefully it would diffuse this idea that if it was something that came from the far left, that the far right needs to respond. Hopefully that is not the case. Either way, whether it is just a one-off disturbed individual or even if this person had some kind of more political motive, it needs to be quelled. And I think it really needs to be quelled by joint statements of political leadership,
Mick Mulroy,
not just individual statements.
Please stay with us. Don't go away. We'd like to reintroduce ourselves, folks, to you, a special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance, David Gura and Tom Keene from our studios in New York, with all of the abilities of Bloomberg News, including Nancy Cook, Jordan Fabian, and Hadriana Lowenkron as well. We have an extremely important guest coming up. We'll tell you of that in a moment. But right now, we continue our coverage on Bloomberg Radio across America. David?
Pivotal moment for this country. At this very moment, President Biden expected to meet with his law enforcement team, Homeland Security team, to get another briefing on that investigation. Merrick Garland is going to be there. We know that this investigation, which at first was being handled by the Secret Service, of course, overseeing that event yesterday in Butler, Pennsylvania, in western Pennsylvania, that baton has been passed to the FBI, and Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, has talked about how no resource will be spared to get to the heart of this. Secretary of Homeland Security will be there as well, along with many members of President Biden's team. So we will not hear from President Biden until that briefing takes place. Perhaps we'll hear from him later today. We heard from Joe Mathieu in Wisconsin. Maybe we'll hear from the former president, see the former president today as well. But we are in this vacuum where the investigation is still in its infancy, Tom. Law enforcement collecting all of that information. All the while, they are looking ahead to this critical event taking place in Wisconsin this week. And as we were discussing, 40 different law enforcement agencies preparing security for that.
I guess it's going to be a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year thing, and we're going to learn that it's going to take more money to protect, whether it's those of our legislative branches and frankly at the state level as well. You wonder if there's going to be a budget sea change here, as frankly there was when Lincoln was assassinated in 1865. But to me, far more important is what do they do this afternoon or tomorrow? There has to be a change behavior going into these two conventions.
Yeah, and we know that the former president had a large Secret Service apparatus surrounding him, not as large as the current president, just given the fact that he's in the job and has a longer motorcade, more people in it and more vehicles in it as well, more security. But what does it mean? And we've heard the calls in these recent hours for heightened security for Donald Trump, heightened security for RFK Jr. as well. He doesn't have Secret Service protection at this point, and one can't help but look at him and his candidacy and think of his history, his personal history, of course. His father killed by an assassin in Los Angeles in the late 60s after he won the California primary, something he didn't really want to get into on Fox News yesterday when he was interviewed, but something I think that's top of mind to his supporters and others.
Is Mick Mulroy still with us? Mick, are you still there?
Yes, Tom, I'm still here.
I just, we're getting on in the show, and I lose my bearings. The interns came in. I'd explain to the interns, you're in the news business. Sunday's your new Monday. Mick Mulroy, again, thank you so much with your military perspective. One of the shocks we have is the distance of this assassination attempt. Those of us of a certain vintage understand the distance is usually much shorter. For our two presidents, for President Biden, former President Trump, how do people like you protect them at a short distance?
So the short distance is, close-up security where there is both individuals that are obvious Secret Service. You can see them with the sunglasses and the radio receiver in their ear. But there's also people that aren't obvious. They're wearing plain clothes. They're not necessarily somebody you would expect for security because they have a different view of the threats in the audience that somebody who is obviously security wouldn't have. So you're going to have a combination of that. And then, of course, when it comes to an area like this, there has to be a complete survey of where the threat areas would be. And this, if you just look at the overhead imaging, this building would have been a significant threat, I think. And they should have done something. They should have had law enforcement on the roof, on the ground to prevent people from getting up there. They should have obstructed the line of sight from these areas to where the former president was speaking. I mean, the investigation is new, but this is something that I think has already been pointed out by so many that just looked at this. So they're going to have to adjust the way they do these type of events, potentially no more outside events, and they might have to supplement the Secret Service.
That's an important statement, McDavid. This is important. No more outside events. Just like it's stealing the process. It's stealing, David Gura, democracy from us.
Yeah, and stealing what we know that Donald Trump likes to use as a real campaign tool.
Well said.
And Mick, let me just ask you, as you looked at this event, 15,000 people in this field in western Pennsylvania, you, of course, I'm sure are aware of what we heard from Donald Trump when he was the president about his attitude towards security. remember well what he said on January the 6th, that he didn't need metal detectors for those supporters who were going to show up on the National Mall. How do you react just to the security challenges of an event like this in isolation, but also just a string of them? I confess, as I watched this yesterday, I thought, how long was this in the works? How firm a grasp did they have on how many people were going to turn out? I imagine doing security, setting up a security plan and executing it for an event like this is difficult under any circumstances, but in a campaign where this is regular and happening regularly and might be planned with not a ton of advance notice, must complicate things all the more.
Absolutely. So I think it's important to point out just the effort that the Secret Service has to do to be able to protect both the presidential candidate and the president at the same time during a campaign season in a country that, quite frankly, is awash with weapons. The AR-15 is essentially ubiquitous across the United States, especially where I am in Montana. So this is and I'm not talking the political aspects of gun ownership here. I'm just talking the cold, hard sense of security. When people have access to these weapons and then you have an outside event, it makes it extraordinarily difficult for a security protective detail like the Secret Service to do their job. It's different than any other country where this would occur. So there would be an advance team. They would scout out how they were going to do security to cover the danger zones, where he'd come in, where he'd go out, where they'd have their quick reaction force staged, where the nearest hospital is. These are all things that they do everywhere they take a designated presidential candidate, somebody who's won the nomination of the party, or the president, right, of course. And it's only going to get more intense as this goes on. We're seeing an uptick in these events from both candidates, and I don't see it, reducing. I do think it'd be a shame that the democracy would be hampered, but from a security point of view, I think they're going to recommend, they might not follow their recommendation, no more outside events. It is just difficult to cover every, area that has a direct line of sight. This weapon system, by the way, the AR-15, you can shoot somebody at 500 yards. The average Marine going through Parris Island gets taught to shoot somebody with iron sights at 500 yards.
Wow!
Right, so 3 times the distance of where this individual shot. So
that is,
that
is valuable. Mick Mulroy, thank you so much for the perspective earned in his public service to the nation and the military. David, that's the most sobering comment I've heard of all this. And again, it's what we've always done at Surveillance over the years here at Bloomberg, is to talk to people who actually know what they're talking about.
Both in terms
whether
of
it's
the
Rick
security
Davis
apparatus,
and the Western GOP, or Jeanne, Sheehan, Zaino, and all of her work on the turmoil of Northeastern politics, Wendy Schiller up at Brown with a definitive civics textbook. To have Mick talk like that's extraordinary knowledge. Yeah.
Continue to watch all of this unfold. We were talking about the importance of these Sunday shows today. Senator Lindsey Graham is on Meet the Press now, addressing some of what we've been discussing. Says he plans to talk to the former president today, talked a bit about the convention and what to expect, talked about the president's VP pick. He said, quote, "Today underscores why that's an important pick. He wants somebody that is ready on day one, that can help him win, that can help him grow the map." And then I was struck by this, Lindsey Graham nodding to his colleagues across the aisle for their good wishes of good health for the former president, saying, quote, "I think the Republican base adores President Trump. There's going to be a lot of love coming this way, but I'm glad to see my Democratic colleagues saying really good things. And, this is a moment where America has been traumatized, and it's good to see." That's something else that we've been talking an awful lot about this morning, Tom, just how to condemn what's happened here in Pennsylvania and how to move forward, perhaps change that political climate.
We prepare across all of Bloomberg for Balance of Power tonight at 5 p.m. from Milwaukee, led by Kaylee Lines, helping out as well, Joe Mathieu. And we're thrilled that Joe Mathieu from Milwaukee as well. Joe, should we hear from President Trump today?
That's a great question. I think that it would probably not be a surprise if we did. Getting him in front of a camera coming down the stairs from that airplane last night was not a lot. They need to have some sort of presentation for people to get a sense of how he's feeling beyond a written statement here. So we're all waiting for this. Will it include a running mate announcement? Does he appear today with his vice presidential pick? These are some of the questions that we're asking. And, so much of this has been political in our conversation here, but I'm deeply curious to see where we're going with the Secret Service in terms of security details for not only Donald Trump, but also RFK Jr., who had previously requested enhanced security and was denied. And the big part of the conversation that you're referring to on these Sunday morning shows has been promises of hearings and investigations to find out exactly why that person was able to get in the position that he was in right now, and what protocol should follow for presidential candidates or for the president himself. We have rarely found ourselves with so many unanswered questions going into such a massive news event like this Republican convention.
Joe, I'm glad you go there, and we talked a bit about this with Henrietta Treyz a little earlier in the show. We're familiar with the reporting on the Secret Service in recent years. There have been scandals. We think back on when Hillary Clinton went to South America. That an embarrassment, I think, more so than anything else, but of course raised concerns about her security while she was there. You, with your experience covering Washington from the anchor desk and around town as well, get us up to speed on the way that the Secret Service is regarded now. I think I go back to something I was saying to Tom a little while ago. You watch what unfolded on that stage and can't help but be impressed by that group of half dozen agents or so who encircled the president and made sure that he got off the stage safely. But this is an agency that has been beset with problems now for many years. So these calls for hearings, while maybe politically motivated, there is some grist for them. There's some real grist there, and there is some real concern just about the way this agency has been run in recent years.
That's true, and the internal scandals that you're referring to never manifested themselves like this to an actual security concern, if not a breach of protocol. And I don't want to say that that's what it was, but we need to find out. And it's more broadly part of a bias against federal law enforcement. You hear so much about supporting the police, and you're going to hear that every day this week in Milwaukee. But they're talking about your local police, your state police. When it comes to the FBI, when it comes to the Secret Service, they are frequently looked at as bad guys, and particularly in the Republican sphere. This will not help. And it reminds me as well of repeated testimony that we heard over the past year from Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI. He said it in March. He said it in April. He said it again in June, that the terrorist threats have reached a whole other level, were the words that he used in congressional testimony, with specific worries about lone wolf terrorism that we just now witnessed in reality.
Could you describe for us, you're newly there in Milwaukee, we were talking a little bit about the security perimeter, what it's like, what it's likely to be like. I think back on my recent trip to Atlanta, all of the security that I had to go through just to get to this arena where, in fact, neither of the candidates was going to be. We were in the Georgia Tech basketball arena sitting around the concourse watching the debate unfold on the Jumbotron, but there was still an awful lot of security to get through, big gauntlet for us to run through. I can only imagine that before this happened, there were stages upon stages of security that were set up. What does it look like? What's your understanding of what's likely to change here as we move ahead to Milwaukee?
Well, all great questions, and some of this has yet to be announced. I'm in downtown Milwaukee right now in an area where most major streets are closed. So you walk out of your hotel or the building that you're in and you just walk across the street without looking. It's got a bit of a no man's land feel to it here, and there are massive barriers like the type that you would see surrounding the Supreme Court or Capitol Hill that are snaking all throughout the city here. There are a lot of places you simply can't go. I tried to get a coffee this morning and had to have a security guard actually open the gates for me to get out of the block. That's going to get worse. And look at the past couple of conventions here. You had to walk a couple of miles to get in, airport-style security. It's really difficult, and this one's going to be harder than apparently what we've seen before.
Tell us about the 5 o'clock show tonight. I mean, everything's been turned upside down. And, you will have great balance of power conversation. But, I mean, people are flying in right now. They're supposed to be down and, I'm going to go, David, to the convention. Not that you know anything about this, but, you get to a convention, you go to the bar. I mean, that's what the people do. How do you go to the bar in Milwaukee, Joe Mathieu? There's, 1,100 delegates?
Yes,
what
indeed.
do they do now after this shock of their guy almost dying?
Well, I can tell you they were still at the bar last night. It was just a very, very different feeling. Yeah. And it was pretty remarkable. I was out with Rick Davis and one of our producers. We got in late. We talked on the radio for a while. We went out to dinner even later. The restaurants were packed. This town is full. You can't get a hotel room. But there was not a celebration inside the restaurant. It's somber. And as I said earlier, there is genuinely a dark feeling in Milwaukee. It's cloudy and it's been drizzly so far today. When you talk to people are kind of nodding at each other, giving a smile. because there's just a fear in the air that's very difficult to quantify and describe.
And then David Gura, bring that over to Chicago. I would suggest, it seems a million months away, but it's not. It's 2 cups of coffee away, and
it's true.
We'll have Joe Mathieu there and Kayleigh Lines and Anne-Marie Horton and the rest. But David Gura, I'm sorry, there's a dark cloud over Chicago in August as well.
And it had been over Chicago for a couple of weeks now. I think after that debate, there was a lot of uncertainty about how those events would proceed. And Joe, jump in here in just a sec. But I mean, I think that as I've said this morning, there's a fragility to that convention. I think that the sort of events leading to that fragility might get a little less attention now in the coming days because the focus shifts so squarely to the Republicans. But with what happened in Atlanta, with how President Biden has comported himself since, we've got this interview tomorrow with Lester Holt. We'll see how that advances this story. I think uncertainty is the word that I keep reaching for here, Joe. Correct me if I'm wrong. We don't know how fragile, how fractious that convention is going to be, but I don't think those dark clouds are going away anytime soon, to borrow Tom's metaphor.
No, they're building, and there's a real question about what happens to Bloomberg's reporting here, and I don't know that anyone has matched it, about advancing the nominating process to July 21st, when there's a virtual meeting of DNC officials. The idea was to lock this down earlier than August so he could get on the ballot both in Ohio, which they seem to have solved, but also just to quiet this whole conversation. I don't know how they could pull that off now. I don't know exactly how Joe Biden can do that interview now with Lester Holt. Is he going to be able to criticize the man he's running against? Not starting today. And what kind of criticism will he be able to levy? How do you talk about January 6th in the same tone after what happened yesterday?
Joe Mathieu, thank you so much for the time this morning, getting ready for his coverage at 5 p.m. tonight. Joe Mathieu and Kayleigh Lines, Balance of Power, 5 p.m. worldwide on Bloomberg. This next guest, as we come up here to the end of our coverage this morning, David Gura and Tom Keene, a special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance. And I've been waiting all morning to ask Jack Devine one question, because I sit at home and I'm not you make jokes about it, folks, on Bloomberg Surveillance, but I'm not the Hollywood lodestone that Scarlet Fu is.
You're not. Okay.
And Jack Devine, I want to take this from your reality of CIA employment over decades, 32-year veteran of the Central Intelligence Agency, to the Hollywood-infected attitude of people like me that our domestic intelligence services should know about the people like this shooter and the attempted assassination of a former president. The movies make it sound like there's all sorts of fancy intelligence to know who these people are, but we're blind, aren't we?
Yeah, that's a tough question, Tom. Frankly, it's a needle in a haystack operation. There's a lot goes on ahead of time. They find people, but here you have a loner. I mean, there's no record. There's no record of them. There's nothing to get a handle on, and their operation may take place in a matter of a day or two, right? So I think it's unrealistic. Where the intelligence community is really good is finding when states do it, when governments are trying to do it or plan, and that's where you have a better chance. But the lone wolf, I don't think there's much success in that. You have to be really prepared defensively. You have to make sure you've got your protection networks in, certainly tap your intelligence. If it's a state system, there probably will be alerting. So I was pretty satisfied early on that this was not a state-driven event, although there are so many black swans out there.
Jack, I want to get your perspective on the magnitude of this event as a turning point. And as we heard from Joe Mathieu a moment ago, Christopher Wray, the FBI director, has warned of the threat of domestic terrorism for so long now. We're all aware of how heated the rhetoric has become in American politics today. Several of our guests on the show this morning have spoken in very candid terms about how they felt that this was inevitable, as they put it, that there was a slow but burning build to what we saw happen in Butler, Pennsylvania yesterday. I would love your perspective on that, on the irrevocability of this, that we've gotten to this point. Where do we go from here? Is there any optimism that even if this is a one-off, if this was a lone wolf and a one-man thing, we can find our way back to a saner track of better comedy among both parties?
You would like to think so, but let me be frank. I mean, I'm not optimistic about that. One of the first things struck me was, what about a copycat? And then I sat and thought about it. Yes, there's some people out there who like fame and so on. But I think what we have is a much larger group of potential threats from people that are just so angry. So they have mental issues, but they're so angry they strike out. So I think your earlier guest, I didn't listen to all of them. I was thinking about this ahead of time, but I think their concern is absolutely well founded. But I don't know how we wind back society, and it's not just the rhetoric of the politicians, and we're way out of line on that across the board. But on social media, we have so much going on in there. People are getting immune from the violence that this is more of a societal problem. It won't be fixed with some new legislation or one great speech.
Right.
So, but I think all of us should learn something here.
Where'd you grow up, Jack Devine?
Where did I grow up? And you're going to pick out my accent. Southwest Philadelphia.
Southwest Philly. I thought so. And what's important here is the distinction of urban Philadelphia with the hinterlands west of Altoona in Pennsylvania. You're a grizzled, internationally known expert on intelligence and the violence of intelligence. How do you look at our rural hagiography almost of guns? How do you look at the idea that a kid should have what's it called, David, an AR-15?
AR-15.
A kid has an AR-15 outside Pittsburgh? I mean, you're not hunting pheasant with that, are you?
Right. I mean, this is a national issue about the Second Amendment. Personally, I don't have a gun. That's how I feel about them. They're dangerous, they're dangerous in household. I understand why there's a Second Amendment. I support those that are interested in hunting. I am of the view that weapons of this nature should not be available. People should be registered. But the bigger problem, Tom, is the mental health problem. And, that is so huge.
Right.
So I'm going to bet that this young fellow has had a gun for a long time, that he's hunted in the hills of Pennsylvania. So, it's hard. It's hard. It'll be registered, maybe not. But my guess is the problem is the mental health of our country. And I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a doctor. But I think we all see it every day across a broad spectrum. We've got to tone it down. Get on the highway. I mean, I don't want to take you on a tangent. It's all around us, anger. So I think the copycat thing, sure, that's a problem. But I just think this environment has so much anger, and people want to strike out. And if you're psychologically ill, you shoot at public figures. So I think public figures are a much greater risk. I think we have to reevaluate how we provide security for our candidates. I think we have to up it. One thing that I wondered, and I haven't seen anybody touch on this, I'm wondering why drones in this age of technology are not part of our kit bag. I mean, when we're doing these events, they're just not that hard to manage. But would we have been able to cover the crowds? Now, the reaction time of the Secret Service was spectacular, and how they took them out. But I'm really stumped on the roof incident. So, and I'm trying to think of how that could be prevented. But these are strictly defensive.
Right. Jack, thank you. Jack Devine with us. His best-selling book, Good Hunting, An American Spymaster's Story, was riveting a good 10 years ago here. We continue our coverage at Bloomberg News through the day. David Gura and I will pause here, and we thank all of our team here at Bloomberg Surveillance for helping out today and really through the night tirelessly working on this good conversation. You have a tough job, David. You have to take the big take of 20 minutes of excellence on this. What approach will you take with a big take come Monday?
Well, rest assured we'll do that, and we'll try to get everyone the latest information that we have about the investigation into what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, but also I think we'll hit at some of the themes that we've been touching on over the course of these 3 hours, Tom, principally what this means for our cultural fabric in this country as we look ahead till Milwaukee's convention. And I look forward to Joe Mathieu's coverage with Kaylee Lyons this evening, originating from the site of that convention in Milwaukee. But I say that with great humility, recognizing how little we know right now. And I see something crossing the wire here from the Wall Street Journal The Wall Street Journal reporting authorities found explosive devices in the car of the man who officials say tried to assassinate former President Donald Trump, according to people briefed on the investigation. We haven't independently verified that ourselves, but the Journal has that. And we know that President Biden is in the White House now, getting a briefing from his advisors, Homeland Security advisors, talking to the Attorney General of the United States as well about the investigation that the FBI is mounting here. So I think that that's the dual track that we're going to take. I know that you're going to take as well. Looking back, trying to figure out what's happened here, and also looking forward to the greater import of the significance of what's happened in Western Pennsylvania.
And as I believe you said, within the blur of our 3 hours, and what you said is every speech, you think of the rehearsal, the canned nature of a modern convention. Full disclosure, folks, I hate the canned nature of a modern convention, but every speech now will be rewritten. There's just plain and simple.
We know you as somebody who likes to famously rip up a script, and I think that we're seeing that happen now in preparation for that convention in Milwaukee. As Joe Mathieu was saying, the last time around, Donald Trump was foregoing the common procedure previously, which was not to appear until the last night of the convention. He wanted to be there every night. And so I think in the coming hours, we're going to see when we'll see Donald Trump. Will it be daily at this convention? When is he going to unveil his vice presidential pick? And then indeed, as we've been discussing in so much detail, what does he have to say in that speech to the nation? Yes, to voters, to all of us, about what's happened here and what it means for his predictive path forward.
A story beneath the headlines today, Greg Valliere, how attacks on presidents and candidates have shaped U.S. history. We'll continue to see the shaping of this modern history, and you'll see that tonight at 5 p.m. Joe Mathieu and Kaylee Lyons leading our coverage from Milwaukee. Many more is there as well. Nancy Cook is there, among others, with Bloomberg News. Please stay with us through the day, as David mentioned with the headline from the Wall Street Journal. Breaking news literally by the hour here through the day on an attempted assassination, a failure of assassination of the former president, Donald Trump. Thanks again to all of our team at Bloomberg Surveillance for tireless coverage. We continue now, worldwide, Bloomberg Radio. Good morning. This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, bringing you the best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. You can also watch the show live on YouTube. Visit the Bloomberg Podcast channel on YouTube to see the show weekday mornings from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern from our global headquarters in New York City. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen, and always on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Terminal, and the Bloomberg Business app.